Chapter 938. They flew all the way to the top of the Heaven Duke Mountain. Just as Xiao Chun and the other three arrived at the top of the mountain, they saw a young man dressed in luxurious clothes lying outside the pavilion at the top of the Heavenly Palace mountain. However, this young man's face was very pale, and there was not the slightest fluctuation of spiritual power in him. Clearly, this person was none other than Qin Yuming, whose cultivation base had been crippled by Jiang Yu. Seeing Qin Shi's miserable state, Qin Shi's eyes flashed with reluctance. Xiao Chen, who was beside him, was keenly aware of the change in Qin Shi's expression. However, he did not say anything. Qin Yuming was Qin Shi's cousin, after all. Now that his cultivation base had been crippled, and he had become a cripple, it was normal for Qin Shi to feel sorry for him. However, what could Xiao Chen say about this? He could not possibly cripple Jiang Yu just because of Qin Yuming, could he? Moreover, at the end of the day, Qin Yuming was the one who sought death by provoking Qin Yu's group of four. They slowly landed outside the pavilion on top of Heaven Duke Mountain. Following the appearance of Xiao Chen's group of four, the 9 Firmaments Palace disciple who had been accompanying them in the pavilion immediately came out to greet them. Senior brother Xiao Chen. Knowing what the disciple wanted to say, Xiao Chen waved his hand and said coolly, "I know what happened. I will deal with it." Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the disciple nodded his head. After that, Xiao Chen glanced at Qin Yuming, who was lying on the ground. Ignoring him, he stepped into the pavilion and smiled at Qin Yu's group of four. "I say, senior brother Jiang Yu, you have really given me a difficult problem." "What is it? Junior brother Xiao knows this person?" Jiang Yu asked with a puzzled look. Naturally, he did not know about the relationship between Qin Yuming and Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen did not stand on ceremony with the four of them. He went straight to the stone bench in the pavilion and sat down. Looking at the puzzled Jiang Yu, he smiled wryly and said, "Speaking of which, this person is my brother-in-law. He is Shui Ro's cousin." He told Jiang Yu about Qin Yuming's identity. Hearing that, Jiang Yu's expression became somewhat complicated. He did not expect Qin Yuming, whose cultivation base was crippled by him, to be Xiao Chen's brother-in-law and Qin Shi's cousin. For a moment, Jiang Yu did not know what to say. Jiang Yu remained silent. Instead, it was Chen Yu who spoke up to smooth things over. "That, junior brother Xiao, you can't blame junior brother Jiang for this matter. We were the ones who arrived at the pavilion first, but this brat wanted to chase us away as soon as he arrived. His words were very vulgar. Moreover, if you want to talk about fighting, it was this brat who started it first." Chen Yu's words were true. However, Xiao Chen did not know it was Qin Yuming who attacked first. Hearing Chen Yu's words, Xiao Chen's mouth unconsciously twitched. This was great. Qin Yuming could only blame himself for being unlucky. Facing Chen Yu's group of four, he actually dared to recklessly attack first. If this was not courting death, then what was? Xiao Chen was completely speechless towards this brother-in-law of his. It was rare for a person to court death to such an extent. Thus, how could Xiao Chen blame Jiang Yu? He could not let Jiang Yu stand there and not fight back. Shaking his head with a bitter smile, Xiao Chen poured himself a cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. He smiled at Chen Yu's group of four. "Well, we don't need to care about this matter. Since it's Shui Ro's family, let Shui Ro handle it. It's rare to see such beautiful scenery on Mount Tiangong. Let's not talk about these troublesome matters. Good wine paired with beautiful scenery is a great joy in life." Xiao Chen did not blame Jiang Yu, nor did he blame Qin Yuming. Instead, he chose to ignore them. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Emperor Qin also laughed heartily. "Junior brother Xiao is right. The scenery on Mount Tiangong is indeed rare. I have been in the Tianhe continent for decades. I don't dare to say too much, but I have traveled to all 4 continents of the Tianhe continent. However, I have never seen a place with scenery comparable to Mount Tiangong. With such beautiful scenery paired with such good wine, We brothers will drink until we are drunk today. With Shao Chen, Emperor Qin, and Chen Yu's active activities, the five of them quickly stopped worrying about Qin Yuming's matter. While Shao Chen was drinking with Jiang Yu and the other three, outside the pavilion, Qin Shuru had already arrived in front of Qin Yuming, accompanied by Baihua Fairy and Gu Lingyao. Seeing his sister come, Qin Yuming, who was originally like a dead dog, immediately seemed to come back to life. He crawled in front of Qin Shuru and hugged Qin Shuru's right leg, crying and begging with a sorrowful expression. "Cousin, you have to make a decision for me. My cultivation has been destroyed. From now on, I am a cripple." Qin Yuming, a dignified man, was crying so miserably at this moment. Seeing Qin Yuming's appearance, Qin Shuru's eyes became even more furious. In Qin Shuru's opinion, Qin Yuming was simply a disgrace. As the saying goes, men do not cry easily. Looking at Qin Yuming now, he was crying more miserably than a woman. Kicking Qin Yuming away, Qin Shuru said with a cold face, "Shut up." After being scolded by Qin Shuru, Qin Yuming immediately shut his mouth. Next, Qin Shuru asked Qin Yuming about what had happened. Naturally, Qin Yuming exaggerated his story. According to Qin Yuming, the bad guys were Jiang Yu and the other three while he became the victim. Naturally, Qin Shuru knew that Qin Yuming was lying. Thus, he called over the 9 Firmaments Palace disciple beside him and asked him to tell him what had happened. As expected, the disciple's version of events was completely different from Qin Yuming's version of events. When he heard that Qin Yuming was the one who made the first move, Qin Shuru was left speechless. Qin Shuru could not blame the pitiful Qin Yuming. Looking at him, Qin Shuru shouted coldly, "Come, follow me to apologize to junior brother Jiang Yu." "Apologize? Cousin, are you sure you're not mistaken? My cultivation base was crippled by him. You want me to apologize?" Hearing that, Qin Yuming said with a look of disbelief, "Do you think I shouldn't? You are the one who has a death wish. Besides, given senior brother Jiang Yu's status, even if he kills you, your death will be in vain." "Enough nonsense. Follow me," Qin Shuru said. Ignoring whether Qin Yuming was willing or not, Qin Shuru grabbed him and walked towards the pavilion. After arriving at the pavilion, Qin Shuru ordered Qin Yuming to unwillingly apologize to Jiang Yu. Qin Shuru knew that the hatred in Qin Yuming's heart had yet to dissipate. However, Jiang Yu did not mind. As for Shao Chen, he was also very cold towards his brother-in-law. It was not difficult to see Qin Yuming's character. Shao Chen despised people like him. If it weren't for the fact that Qin Yuming was Qin Shuru's cousin, Qin Yuming would not even be qualified to stand before him, let alone talk to him. After sending Qin Yuming away with just a few words, Qin Shuru turned to Shao Chen and said, "Husband, I'll bring him back first. I'll also check on the Qin family's current situation. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 939. Qin Shuru wanted to bring Qin Yuming back to the Qin family first. Hearing this, Shao Chen nodded and said, "All right, let Baihua go with you. She can take care of you on the way." He asked Baihua Fairy to accompany Qin Shuru back. Qin Shuru did not refuse. The three of them left, but Gu Lingyao stayed behind. The little girl was obviously very fond of the scenery of Mount Tiangong. She surrounded Shao Chen and chattered happily. Since returning to the heavenly Chen continent, Shao Chen had not brought Gu Lingyao anywhere to play. Seeing the little girl jumping around happily, Shao Chen also smiled. The few of them drank wine in the pavilion. With Gu Lingyao by their side, they laughed and chatted happily. Coupled with the beautiful scenery of Mount Tiangong, everyone's mood quickly improved. As for Qin Yuming's matter, it was directly thrown to the back of their minds. Shao Chen and the others drank to their heart's content. On the other side, Qin Shuru and Baihua Fairy brought Qin Yuming all the way to Qin City, where the Qin family was located. Qin City was a city specially built by the Qin family in the central divine realm. It could be considered the Qin family's current headquarters. Thinking about it, a small family that could only hide in the Eastern Sun region could build a city in the central divine realm in just a few decades. One could imagine the Qin family's current development. In comparison, Xiao Chen's Xiao family was still living in seclusion in the Eastern Sun region's Lingshan commandery. Compared to the arrogance of the Qin family, the Xiao family was undoubtedly low-key. At the same time, it was also because of this low-key that the Xiao family was full of mystery. In the past, many of the Xiao family's direct descendants had benefited from the power of the bloodline. Although they did not activate the divine bloodline, their talents had increased a lot. With such talents, the Xiao family's development over the years naturally did not disappoint. Moreover, unlike the Qin family, the Xiao family's strength was true strength, unlike the Qin family, which relied on those consecrators to become strong. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the current Xiao clan was as strong as the 7 overlords, excluding Saint Jiu Xiao and the others. Even so, the Xiao clan didn't reveal their true strength. Most of the time, when the disciples of the Xiao clan went out to gain experience, they weren't as arrogant as the Qin clan. Perhaps this was the difference between the Nouveau Riche and the Divine Clan. The Xiao family never deliberately showed their strength. Of course, if anyone dared to provoke them, they naturally knew the consequences. Of course. Along the way, he was to die to the family's fairy. He had just narrowly escaped death, but now, he had already started coveting the beauty of the 100-flower fairy. Previously, Qin Yuming was nervous and did not notice the 100-flower fairy. Now that Qin Shuru was leading the way, Qin Yuming inadvertently saw the 100-flower fairy's appearance. With just one glance, he was completely attracted by the 100-flower fairy's beautiful face. His gaze could no longer move away from the 100-flower fairy. At the same time, the bestial desire in his eyes could not be concealed, as if he wanted to eat the 100-flower fairy in one bite. Sensing Qin Yuming's gaze, the 100-flower fairy's eyes flashed coldly. She turned her head and said coldly, "If you don't want to die, you'd better put away that look." To be honest, if it were not for Qin Shuru, Qin Yuming would be a dead man now. He even dared to covet the 100-flower fairy, who was his brother-in-law's woman in name. He really did not know what was good for him. Regarding this, Qin Shuru was furious and gave Qin Yuming a merciless slap. Qin Shuru was extremely disappointed with his cousin's changes over the years. Moreover, this guy was really too bold. He even dared to covet the 100-flower fairy. If Xiao Chen knew about this, Qin Shuru would definitely kill him, even if Qin Shuru personally pleaded for mercy. After being taught a lesson by Qin Shuru, Qin Yuming became much more well-behaved and did not dare to think about anything else. The three of them arrived at the Qin city. The Qin city was not large. After all, there were only the Qin clan members in the city. There were also some servants and consecrators living in the city. They directly entered the Qin city and arrived at the Qin clan's mansion. The Qin clan's mansion was extremely large and could be said to be extremely luxurious. However, Qin Shuru was very disgusted by such extravagance. With a grim face, Qin Shuru strode into the main hall of the Qin clan's mansion. Upon hearing that Qin Shuru had returned, the members of the Qin clan quickly came out to welcome him. The two leading figures were two middle-aged men with similar appearances. One of them was the current patriarch of the Qin clan, Qin Shuru's uncle, Qin Feng. The other one was Qin Shuru's uncle, Qin Shan. Compared to Qin Feng's arrogance, Qin Shan had been a well-behaved person since he was young. Additionally, he also had a somewhat dull personality. That was something that could be clearly seen from the two of them. "Oh, Shui Ro, you're finally back. I was thinking about going to Nine Firmaments Palace to visit you in a few days' time." Seeing Qin Shuru walking over, Qin Feng stepped forward with a smile on his face. Qin Shan, who was beside him, did not say anything. He simply smiled and nodded at Qin Shuru. The two brothers also revealed smiles on their faces. However, Qin Feng's smile was more of a fawning one, while Qin Shan's smile was more of a sincere one. Perhaps it was because of Qin Yuming, but Qin Shuru instinctively felt disgusted with his uncle, Qin Feng. Thus, he ignored Qin Feng. Instead, he nodded at Qin Shan before walking into the main hall of the Qin clan's mansion. Everyone from the Qin clan had gathered in the main hall of the Qin clan. Qin Shuru sat on the main seat while 100-Flower Fairy sat beside him. Qin Shuru glanced at the members of the Qin clan and said coolly, "Yoming's matter ends here. He brought this upon himself." Qin Shuru did not beat around the bush. However, hearing that, Qin Feng and his wife grew displeased. Qin Feng said, "Shui Ro, no matter what, Yuming is still your little brother. Now that his cultivation base has been crippled, you want us to just let it go? If so, what will happen to our Qin clan's face?" Qin Feng disagreed. Qin Shuru said coldly, "Face? Are you talking about the Qin clan's face, or the face of my husband, Xiaochen? It seems that our Qin clan has indeed done a lot of evil things in the name of my husband. Uncle, as the head of the Qin clan, don't you feel sorry for it?" Looking at these family members who used to be familiar with him, it was as if they had all changed into different people. They had all become arrogant and did not put anyone in their eyes. It was as if the Qin clan was the boss of the Tianqian continent. However, they did not know that the Qin clan was only where it was today because of Xiaochen. To destroy the Qin clan, to put it bluntly, it only took one sentence from Xiaochen. It was ridiculous that the members of the Qin clan still did not understand this. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 940. Looking at the familiar faces in front of him, Qin Shuru only felt that the current Qin family was so unfamiliar. Many of the members of the Qin family had changed, and their faces were involuntarily filled with arrogance. The anger in his heart could not help but rise. Sitting beside Qin Shuru, 100-Flower Fairy was also filled with helplessness towards the members of the Qin family. It seemed that the Qin family had indeed changed too much. Of course, some people had changed, but there were also people who still stuck to their original hearts. It was just that there were very few of them. Take Qin Shan for example. In the face of the Qin family's meteoric rise, Qin Shan was still the same as before. There was not much change in Qin Shan. He still gave people the impression that he was humble, courteous, and honest. When he stood next to his younger brother, Qin Feng, the difference between the two was immediately apparent. Look at Qin Feng. From top to bottom, his clothes were incomparably luxurious. The rings and bracelets on his hands and even his hairband were shining with golden light. In comparison, Qin Shan only wore a simple green robe. He did not have any accessories on him. He was simple and elegant. He was far from Qin Feng, who looked like a nouveau riche. With a gloomy expression, Qin Shuru shouted angrily. In the face of Qin Shuru's angry shout, even Qin Feng did not dare to say anything. Although Qin Shuru was a junior, her identity was different. Just her identity as Xiao Chen's wife alone was enough to make Qin Feng not dare to act rashly in front of Qin Shuru. With a gloomy expression, Qin Feng shut his mouth and sat back down on his seat. As for Qin Feng's wife, she hugged Qin Yuming with tears on her face and whispered something to him. She was probably comforting him. He did not like this uncle of his, but what could Qin Shuru do? After all, he was his biological uncle. After taking a deep look at Qin Shuru withdrew his gaze. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he asked, "Where's Uncle Fu? Why don't I see him?" The Uncle Fu that Qin Shuru mentioned was the old housekeeper of the Qin family. It could be said that he had watched Qin Shuru grow up. Qin Shuru had a deep affection for Uncle Fu. But today, Uncle Fu was not present, so Qin Shuru asked curiously. However, it would have been better if they hadn't asked. The moment Qin Shuero said that, everyone's expression changed drastically. They lowered their heads and didn't say anything. They didn't dare to look at Qin Shuero. Uncle! Qin Feng was startled when he heard Qin Shuero's question. It was a long while later before he recovered and said with a guilty smile, Uncle Fu went to the Eastern Sun region for some matters. He will only be back after some time. While speaking, Qin Feng did not dare to look Qin Shuru in the eyes. Looking at Qin Feng's expression, Qin Shuru was sure that this guy was talking. The coldness in his eyes intensified. But to everyone's surprise, Qin Shan, who had been silent all this while, stepped forward and spoke. Third brother, how can some things be hidden? Since you dare to do it, why don't you dare to admit it? Qin Shan suddenly spoke. Hearing his words, Qin Feng's face sank. He glared at Qin Shan and snarled. Qin Shan, you, clearly, there was an inside story. However, Qin Shan ignored Qin Feng's cold rebuke this time. Instead, he turned to look at Qin Shuru and said with a complicated expression, Shuru, Uncle Fu has been locked up by your third uncle. Fu Bo didn't even leave the Qin mansion. Instead, he was locked up by Qin Feng. As for the reason, it was because Fu Bo couldn't stand Qin Yuming's actions and had angered Qin Yuming. After which, he was locked up by Qin Feng in the dungeon. Qin Yuming had been a lecherous person all these years. Whenever he fancied a woman, he would use various methods to forcefully bring her back to the Qin residence. Not only did Qin Feng not reprimand him, he even set aside an area in the backyard of the Qin residence and built a harem for Qin Yuming. It was specially used to lock up and watch over the women who were forcefully brought back by Qin Yuming. To our young master Qin, kidnapping women was a common occurrence. Uncle Fu really couldn't stand it anymore, which was why he angered Qin Yuming and Qin Feng. Hearing that Qin Feng had locked Uncle Fu in the dungeon, Qin Shuru's originally ice-cold expression became even more unsightly. An icy aura unconsciously spread out from his body. In an instant, the temperature in the main hall dropped by quite a bit. Feeling the icy spiritual energy spreading out from Qin Shuru's body, everyone in the Qin family trembled with fear. Qin Shuru coldly looked at Qin Feng, then turned to Qin Shan and said, Uncle, bring me to the dungeon. Hearing Qin Shuru's words, Qin Shan did not say anything. He nodded and brought Qin Shuru to the Qin residence's dungeon. However, Qin Feng did not follow them. In the dark and damp dungeon, Qin Shuru saw Uncle Fu. Seeing that Uncle Fu had aged a lot, Qin Shuru said softly, Uncle Fu, you, young miss, you're finally back. This is great. The Qin family is saved. Seeing Qin Shuru, Uncle Fu spoke emotionally. Ignoring his weak body, he struggled to stand up and spoke with a sorrowful expression. Young miss, third master is not suitable to be the patriarch. All these years, the Qin family has been ruined by him. Uncle Fu recounted everything that Qin Shuru had done over the years, including how Qin Yuming had forcefully snatched women and built a residence to imprison these women for his pleasure. Hearing Uncle Fu's narration, Qin Shuru's heart trembled violently. He originally thought that the Qin family had only been a little arrogant over the years. He did not expect that the Qin family had done so many outrageous things. The anger in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Even Hundred Flower Fairy, who was standing beside him, revealed a murderous intent. However, she sighed and said, Young miss, we can't let them go this time. Sister, even though we're family, we can't show any mercy this time. If the Qin family continues like this, we won't be far from destruction. At that time, I'm afraid our husband will personally take action. Hearing Hundred Flower Fairy's words, Qin Shuru took a deep breath. He knew that Hundred Flower Fairy was right. Qin Shuru nodded slightly and said, Young miss, don't worry. I know what to do. Third uncle is indeed not suitable to be the patriarch of the Qin family anymore. Originally, Qin Shuru only wanted to reprimand third uncle so that he could restrain the Qin family in the future. But now, it seemed that the Qin family could no longer be changed. The poison had already seeped into their bones. Only by scraping off their bones and treating the poison could the Qin family change. Qin Shuoro looked at Qin Shan and said with a hint of reproach in her voice, "Eldest uncle, all these years, you've just watched third uncle run amok without doing anything?" Being reprimanded by Qin Shuru, Qin Shan said with some shame, "Shuru, you know eldest uncle's character. I don't want to fight for anything. Moreover, all these years, your third uncle's words have been the law in the Qin family. What can I do even if I say anything?" Qin Shan had always been aloof from worldly affairs. It was not that he did not reprimand Qin Feng, but what was the use of saying anything? Qin Feng did not listen at all. So in the end, Qin Shan simply did not care about the Qin family's matters and focused on living his own life. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 941. Qin Shur was indeed somewhat dissatisfied with Qin Shan, but he also understood that his uncle's temperament was somewhat weak. Naturally, he would not be able to keep Qin Feng in check by himself. Qin Shur had initially been disappointed with the Qin family, but now, he was furious. It was hard to imagine that the Qin family would do such a thing. Those innocent women were captured by Qin Yuming and imprisoned in the Qin family's backyard. Moreover, Qin Yuming treated these women as his playthings. Almost every few days, someone would be tortured to death by Qin Yuming. Moreover, what made Qin Shur even angrier was that Qin Feng would also play with these women. Sometimes, the father and son would even play with the same woman at the same time. This was simply perverted. They were worse than beasts. Just as Flower Fairy had said, he could no longer be soft-hearted towards the Qin family. Otherwise, the Qin family would not be far from being destroyed. Xiao Chen was still unaware of these things. With Xiao Chen's personality, Qin Shur had no doubt that once Xiao Chen knew about these things, no one would be able to save the Qin family, including Qin Shur himself. In the face of such a major issue, Xiao Chen would definitely not care about Qin Shur's feelings. Therefore, in order to save the Qin family, he had to first get rid of the black sheep, Qin Feng and Qin Shan, in exchange for a glimmer of hope for the Qin family. In Qin Shur's heart, he did not expect the Qin family to be powerful. As long as his family could be safe and happy, that was enough. However, the Qin family had completely changed. It had changed so much that Qin Shuru almost could not recognize it. After reprimanding Qin Shan, Qin Shur turned around and held Flower Fairy's hand. He said with a pleading expression, "Sister, don't tell husband about this. Let me handle it myself, okay?" "Okay." Hearing this, 100 Flower Fairy nodded. Qin Shur returned to the main hall with Uncle Fu and Qin Shan after knowing what the Qin clan had done all these years. At this moment, the members of the Qin clan were still gathered in the main hall. However, Qin Shuru didn't know that when she and Qin Shan were heading to the dungeon, Qin Feng had already made his preparations. Qin Feng was not stupid. He knew that after Qin Shuru met Uncle Fu would definitely tell him everything. And Qin Shuru, who had obtained everything, would at least abolish his position as the head of the family. Qin Feng did not want to be captured without putting up a fight. Therefore, during the time when Qin Shur was away, Qin Feng had arranged dozens of men of sacrifice around the main hall, hoping to fight against Qin Shur. He was unwilling to lose his position as the head of the family. Over the years, Qin Feng had thoroughly tasted the sweetness of power. Every time he went out, everyone would call him the head of the Qin clan, which made Qin Feng feel relaxed and happy. Qin Feng was unwilling to lose his position as the head of the family. He had already fallen into madness, which was why Qin Feng had done such a crazy thing in order to use his men of sacrifice to deal with Qin Shuru and then protect his position as the head of the family. Qin Feng even dared to lay his hands on Qin Shuru for the sake of the patriarch position. Of course, Qin Shuru didn't know about this. She walked all the way back to the main hall. However, when she stepped into the main hall, Flower Fairy sensed something and revealed a cold smile. She didn't say anything and sat down with Qin Shuru on the main seat. After all, Flower Fairy wasn't a member of the Qin clan and Qin Shuru was here, so she didn't say anything. At this time, Qin Shuru brought Uncle Fu to the main hall and shouted coldly at Qin Feng. "Third uncle, I don't think I need to say anything more. Let me ask you about what you've done over the years. Are you worthy of the ancestors of the Qin clan?" Turning back, Qin Shuru's anger had turned into killing intent. He looked at Qin Feng with a murderous look. Feeling this murderous look, Qin Feng couldn't help but feel his heart beat wildly. However, he still braced himself and stood up. "Shuru, I don't know what third uncle did wrong." At this point, it was too early for Qin Feng to continue quibbling. Qin Shuru was furious to the extreme when facing this, and she laughed. "All right. Since it's like that, Uncle Fu, tell me everything third uncle has done during these years." Hearing Qin Shuru's words, Uncle Fu didn't hesitate and immediately told him everything that Qin Feng had done over the years. Listening to Uncle Fu's narration, the murderous look in Qin Shuru's eyes became more and more intense. He couldn't wait to kill his third uncle. He was worse than a pig or a dog. Even if he was worse than a pig or a dog, he wouldn't have done what Qin Feng had done. Faced with Uncle Fu's accusations, Qin Feng's face gradually darkened. He knew that he had no other choice. He could either give up the position of the clan head or fight Qin Shuru with all his might. He didn't say anything and just listened to Uncle Fu's accusations. After a while, when Uncle Fu finished speaking, Qin Shuru finally spoke. "Third uncle, do you have anything else to say? So, what do you plan to do now?" Perhaps because he was forced into a corner and had no other way out, Qin Feng simply made up his mind. He looked straight into Qin Shuru's eyes and said coldly. Qin Shuru also noticed the change in Qin Feng, but he didn't care about it now. Suppressing the murderous look in his heart, Qin Shuru said coldly. "Since third uncle has nothing to say, then I announce that from today onwards, Qin Feng's position as the clan head and his lineage's cultivation will be abolished, and he will be expelled from the Qin clan." In the end, Qin Shuru's heart softened. He didn't kill Qin Feng, but he did abolish Qin Feng's position as the clan head. After doing so many things that angered the heavens and the people, Qin Feng definitely couldn't be the clan head of the Qin clan anymore. Moreover, Qin Shuru also wanted to abolish the cultivation of everyone in Qin Feng's lineage and expel them from the Qin clan. Hearing Qin Shuero's words, the expressions of the Qin clansmen from Qin Feng's line changed greatly. And it was also at this moment that Qin Feng, who had unknowingly walked to the center of the main hall, suddenly burst into wild laughter. "Haha, abolish my position as the clan head? Abolish the cultivation of everyone in my lineage and expel them from the clan? Qin Shuru, who do you think you're killing? Since when did you have the right to criticize the Qin clan? You're just a junior." Hearing Qin Feng's laughter, Qin Shuru said in a deep voice, "It's not up to you to decide whether I have the right or not. Qin Feng, I don't want to talk nonsense with you. Do you want to do it yourself, or do you want me to do it?" Qin Shuru was completely disappointed with Qin Feng. Now, he didn't even call him third uncle, but directly called him by his name. No matter what, Qin Shuru had to do this today. Sparing Qin Feng's life was already Qin Shuru's bottom line. However, Qin Feng didn't seem to appreciate Qin Shuru's soft-heartedness. Hearing Qin Shuru's words, Qin Feng's eyes flashed with a touch of determination and madness. Then, he shouted coldly, "Qin Shuru, don't go too far. It's not up to you to criticize the Qin clan. Today, you want to abolish my position as the clan head? Wishful thinking." At this point, they had already shed all pretense of cordiality. Following Qin Shuru's words, dozens of black-clothed martial artists holding weapons rushed in from outside the main hall. They surrounded Qin Feng and protected him in the middle. Each and every one of them stared coldly at Qin Shuru, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 942. These dozens of black-clothed warriors with weapons in their hands were the men of sacrifice that Qin Feng had raised over the years. At this time, these people firmly protected Qin Feng in the middle and looked at Qin Shuru coldly. Originally, they had planned to spare Qin Feng's life and only cripple his cultivation and expel him from the Qin family. But who would have thought that Qin Feng would be so crazy and want to attack Qin Shuru? Facing Qin Feng's stubborn resistance, the killing intent in Qin Shuru's eyes intensified. Beside him, Flower Fairy still had a faint smile on her face. In fact, Flower Fairy had already sensed the existence of these men of sacrifice just now, but she didn't say anything. Now that these men of sacrifice had appeared, Flower Fairy said to Qin Shuru, "Sister, if you can't bear to do it, I can do it for you." In Flower Fairy's view, it was obviously difficult for Qin Shuru to kill Qin Feng and the others. But judging from Qin Feng's actions, this person indeed deserved to die. Now that he was stubbornly resisting, Qin Shuru had no reason to let Qin Feng go. Knowing that it was difficult for Qin Shuiro to kill Qin Feng, after all, he was her uncle, Flower Fairy took the initiative to speak. Hearing this, a hint of struggle flashed across Qin Shuiro's eyes, but it was only for a moment. She then nodded slightly and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, sister." With that, Qin Shuru got up, took one last look at Qin Feng, and then disappeared from the main hall in a flash. Qin Feng didn't understand Qin Shuru's current strength. He only thought that Qin Shuru was still the little girl from back then. Little did he know that over the years in the Tianhe continent, Qin Shuru had already changed. Therefore, when she wanted to leave, Qin Shuru had already disappeared from the main hall before Qin Feng and the others could even react, let alone stop her. It was no exaggeration to say that Qin Feng's choice to stubbornly resist Qin Shuru to the end was really thinking too much. Not to mention relying on the dozens of death attendants in front of him, even if he gathered the power of the entire Qin family, Qin Feng could not do anything to Qin Shuru. As Qin Shuru left, Flower Fairy waved her hand, and the door to the main hall was tightly shut. At the same time, Flower Fairy stood up and said with a faint smile on her face, "Those who are not from Qin Feng's faction, step forward. Otherwise, don't blame me if you accidentally injure them." The people of the Qin family present were not from Qin Feng's faction. After hearing Flower Fairy's words, they quickly divided into two camps. Although the people of the Qin family didn't know how strong Flower Fairy was, they obviously didn't want to participate in this matter. Seeing that everyone obediently separated from Qin Feng's faction, Flower Fairy smiled slightly. At the same time, Qin Feng coldly shouted, pretending to be mysterious, "Who are you, little girl? You don't deserve to interfere in the affairs of the Qin family." Qin Feng didn't think that Flower Fairy was very strong. After all, Flower Fairy was still too young. However, following his words, Flower Fairy's figure instantly disappeared. No one saw Flower Fairy's movements clearly, but when she reappeared, she was already in front of a man of sacrifice. She slapped out and hit the man's chest, shattering his heart meridians. She killed a man with a single slap. These men of sacrifice trained by Qin Feng were indeed loyal to him, but their cultivation was too low. Basically, they were only in the Dao Gate realm. In Flower Fairy's eyes, such cultivation was really not enough. Even if there were hundreds of people, Flower Fairy wouldn't care about them, let alone dozens of people. As for Qin Feng, whether it was Flower Fairy or Qin Shuru, they didn't care about him at all. However, the laughing Qin Feng didn't have the slightest self-awareness, thinking that he could compete with Qin Shuru. Seeing that Flower Fairy directly chose to attack, and her movement technique was extremely fast, along with the death of this man of sacrifice, Qin Feng's face instantly turned gloomy. He didn't expect Flower Fairy to have such strength, but it was too late to say anything now. Without giving Qin Feng any time to think, Flower Fairy shuttled through the crowd, and with every strike, someone fell. Qin Feng's men of sacrifice were no match for Flower Fairy at all. They didn't expect this unbelievably beautiful woman to have such terrifying strength. In front of her, Qin Feng's people were like clay chickens and pottery dogs. In just a short time, Qin Feng's men of sacrifice were all killed, leaving only Qin Feng's people trembling in fear. It was as if they had encountered the most terrifying thing in the world. Even Qin Feng himself didn't expect that the men of sacrifice that he had spent so many years and countless resources to train would be so easily killed by Flower Fairy. Seeing Flower Fairy approaching step by step, Qin Feng's wife's face was already pale. She screamed as if she had seen a ghost. "Don't come over." She was scared, really scared. However, Flower Fairy turned a deaf ear to Qin Feng's wife's screams. Her figure moved, and she directly swept towards Qin Feng's people. They didn't have the strength to fight back at all. Soon, the main hall returned to peace. However, at this moment, the main hall was littered with nearly 100 corpses. Qin Feng's people were all killed by Flower Fairy, including Qin Yuming. Looking at Qin Feng's corpse on the ground, the rest of the Qin family sucked in a breath of cold air. They didn't expect that Flower Fairy, who was as beautiful as a fairy, would be so ruthless. When she killed Qin Feng's people, she didn't have the slightest hesitation. Qin Feng's people were completely annihilated. Perhaps even until the end, Qin Feng didn't expect that his strength would be so weak in front of Flower Fairy. After doing all this, Flower Fairy's expression didn't change. She elegantly walked out of the main hall. With Qin Feng's death, the rest of the matters would naturally be handled by Qin Shuru. She slowly walked out of the main hall. Outside the main hall, Flower Fairy saw Qin Shuru at a glance. Obviously, she had been waiting here all this time. At this moment, seeing Flower Fairy walk out of the main hall, Qin Shuru naturally knew that Qin Feng's people were finished. His face revealed a somewhat forced smile. "Thank you, sister." Knowing that Qin Shuru was in a bad mood, Flower Fairy stepped forward and held Qin Shuru's hand, comforting him with a gentle tone. "Sister, if you want the Qin family to live for a long time, there is no other way. Some malignant tumors must be ruthlessly removed. If you don't stop them, they will only cause more trouble. Sister, you must understand this principle." "Sister, don't worry. I understand." Hearing this, Qin Shuru nodded. He knew that Flower Fairy's words weren't wrong. Qin Feng's people must be eradicated. Otherwise, the Qin family will be destroyed by his hands one day. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 943. He felt extremely grateful towards Fairy Baihua. Although Fairy Baihua had killed off everyone from Qin Shuru's faction, Qin Shuru knew very well that Fairy Baihua had only done so to avoid making things difficult for Qin Shuru. For that reason, Fairy Baihua was willing to be the bad guy. At any rate, Fairy Baihua did not care what others thought of her. In this world, the only person she cared about was Xiao Chun. After destroying Qin Feng's faction, the following matters became much simpler. Qin Shuru simply announced that Qin Shan would succeed the position of patriarch of the Qin family. Truth be told, Qin Shan's personality was not suitable for the position of patriarch. However, there was no other choice. At present, besides Qin Shan, no one else was qualified to be the patriarch of the Qin family. Additionally, despite Qin Shan's cowardly personality, he was much more honest compared to Qin Feng. As such, while Qin Shan might not be able to lead the Qin family to a great development, he could at least ensure the safety of the Qin family. This was what Qin Shuru wanted to see the most. She did not ask for the Qin family to become strong. She only hoped that the members of the Qin family could live in peace. Naturally, if there were any outstanding disciples amongst the younger generation of the Qin family, Qin Shuru would definitely arrange for them to join the new sect that he was about to establish. Without the obstruction of Qin Feng's faction, Qin Shan smoothly ascended to the position of patriarch. After that, he stayed in the Qin family for another day. Only then did Qin Shuru and Fairy Baihua return to Nine Firmaments Palace. Earlier, Shao Chen had already sent a message to Qin Shuru, telling him to return to Nine Firmaments Palace directly. They had already left Heavenly Duke Mountain. The change in the Qin family did not attract too much attention. As for Qin Shan's succession to the position of family head, it was done in a low-key manner. As such, outsiders were unaware of the change in the Qin family. At that very moment, everyone in the heavenly Qin mainland was focused on Nine Firmaments Palace. All the famous characters in the heavenly Qin mainland were gathered there. They safely returned to Nine Firmaments Palace. After meeting up with Shao Chen, Qin Shuru did not hide anything from her. He told her everything about the Qin family. Shao Chen did not say anything about that. She simply pulled Qin Shuru into her embrace and said softly, "Brother, you are the one with the Qin family. Don't think too much about it. There are always black sheep in every big family. Just get rid of them." He did not blame Qin Shuru. On the contrary, he comforted him. To Shao Chen, the Qin family was not worth his attention, let alone Qin Feng. She hinted at Qin Shuru not to think too much about it. Now that Qin Feng's bloodline had been eliminated, the Qin family would be better off in the future. After being comforted by Shao Chen, Qin Shuru snuggled into Shao Chen's embrace and nodded slightly. In the next few days, as the banquet was about to begin, Shao Chen and the others did not go out. However, there was an endless stream of people coming to visit them every day. Almost all the experts from the various big families and sects came to visit Shao Chen. It could not be helped. These people knew very well that in the heavenly Qin mainland, you could ignore other people. However, you could not ignore Shao Chen. He was a monstrous character who had left behind too many legends. Although Shao Chen was still young, his deeds had been widely spread in the heavenly Qin mainland. Everything about Shao Chen was talked about enthusiastically. With so many people coming to visit, Shao Chen naturally could not meet all of them. Other than some people who he could not refuse, Shao Chen left the others to Qin Yao and Qin Luo. It was indeed somewhat belittling to let the maids receive the experts from all over the heavenly Qin mainland. However, no one dared to show any dissatisfaction. On the contrary, even when facing Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the other maids of Shao Chen, these important figures were all respectful. They did not dare to treat the 6 women as maids. After interacting with these important figures every day, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and Qin Yao's temperament gradually changed. If they were not Shao Chen's maids, no one would be able to tell. From the way they talked and their temperament, it was impossible to associate them with maid. The 6 women gradually matured. Not only did they do a good job in taking care of Shao Chen and the others, but they were also fully competent in other matters. Shao Chen was naturally happy about this. Therefore, Shao Chen was very assured to leave these matters to the 6 women. With Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and Qin Luo helping him deal with the experts from the various large clans and sects, Shao Chen was free. However, during this period, people from the Shao clan naturally came to visit Shao Chen. Shao Chen naturally had to personally greet the people from the Shao clan. Not only Shao Chen, but even Shao Qing also showed up. After returning to the heavenly Qin mainland, Shao Chen and his family had not had the time to visit the current Shao clan. However, after chatting for a while, Shao Chen and his father knew that the current Shao clan had undergone a complete transformation. The glory of the sacred clan was also slowly recovering. Shao Chen and Shao Qing were very gratified by the growth of the Shao clan. After all, the Shao clan was their root. It did not take long for the day of the banquet to arrive. On this day, countless wooden seats had been set up on the Heavenly Sword Peak that was once Nine Firmaments Palace's Heavenly Sword Peak, from the foot of the mountain all the way to its summit. The Sky Sword Peak was the location of the banquet this time. Many people came. No matter who they were, they all wanted to attend this banquet. Based on their status and cultivation, there were people seated from the foot of the mountain to the peak of the mountain. Of course, the closer one was to the peak of the mountain, the higher one's status was. However, there were very few people who could sit at the peak of the mountain for this banquet. Only Shao Xing and the other patriarchs, Shao Chen, Chen Ling, and the other holy sons and holy daughters, as well as the 9 firmaments saint and other sage realm experts. Even Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls were not qualified to sit at the peak of the mountain. They were slightly behind Shao Chen and the others. On the peak of the mountain, there were a total of more than 10 tables and chairs. Among them, Shao Xing and the other 3 naturally sat at the main seat. On the left side of the 4 seats were the 9 firmaments saint and the other holy sons and holy daughters, while on the right side were Shao Chen and the other holy sons and holy daughters. Below them were Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls, as well as Gudahuia and the others, as well as those who had gone to the Tianhe continent to train with them. According to their status and cultivation, they lined up at the foot of the mountain. When the banquet began, the entire sky sword peak was completely lively. Everyone drank and chatted. During the banquet, beautiful maids shuttled back and forth between the banquet, constantly serving food and wine to everyone. The atmosphere was very lively. However, in addition to chatting, everyone's eyes were fixed on the peak of the mountain. Everyone knew that the person on the peak of the mountain would be the master of the Tianqian continent from now on. At the same time, everyone was very curious about the identity of Randeng Kozii and the other 2 who were sitting at the main seat. They had never seen them before. The people of the Tianqian continent had an impression of Shao Xing. However, they did not know anything about Randeng Kozii and the other 2. However, since they were able to stand side by side with Shao Xing, they were obviously not ordinary people. Please collect, vote, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 944. Countless pairs of eyes stared at Shao Xing's group of 4 at the top of the mountain. It was undeniable that the 4 of them were the true protagonists of the banquet. Even though the 4 of them had only been drinking quietly since the banquet began and had not done anything special, everyone's gaze still remained fixed on them. In fact, the people of the heavenly Qin continent were curious about Shao Xing's resurrection, but they naturally did not ask. Moreover, Shao Xing's resurrection was a good thing for the heavenly Qin continent. Therefore, although the crowd was puzzled, they did not dwell on the matter too much. However, they were very curious about the identities of Randeng Kozii and the other 2. What kind of people could be on the same level as Shao Xing? The banquet continued and the atmosphere was very lively. Unknowingly, the sky gradually darkened and the sun set in the west. The banquet was coming to an end. Just when everyone thought the banquet was about to end, a voice suddenly came from the top of the mountain. The voice came from the Saint of 9 Firmament. Everyone, please be quiet for a moment. Allow me to introduce the 4 great ancestors. Finally, it was time to get to the main topic. Following the Saint of 9 Firmament's voice, the entire Tianjian peak quieted down. Everyone stared at the top of the mountain. At the same time, the Saint of 9 Firmaments introduced Shao Xing and the other 3 ancestors one by one. There was no need to mention Shao Xing. Everyone had heard of him. As for ancient sage Randeng and the other 2, under the introduction of 9 Firmaments Saint, everyone knew that they were the old ancestors from the Sky River continent. Ancient sage Randeng and the other 2 had contributed greatly to repelling the army of demonic cultivators. Seeing that even the Saint of 9 Firmaments was respectful to Randeng Kozii and the other 2, everyone stood up and bowed respectfully to Randeng Kozii and the other 2. Greetings, ancestors. Randeng Kozii and the other 2 were not from the heavenly Qin continent, but the heavenly Qin continent was indebted to them, and they were very powerful. Therefore, no one objected to being addressed as ancestor. This was how the world worked. If you had strength, you would naturally gain the respect of others. Seeing this, the Saint of the 9 Heavens continued to speak. Today, I have invited everyone here to 9 Firmaments Palace, not only to celebrate the rebirth of our heavenly Qin continent, but also to discuss something with everyone here. At this point, the Saint of the Nine Heavens paused and glanced at the crowd before continuing. Everyone should know that our heavenly Chen continent was in imminent danger when faced with the invasion of the demonic cultivator army. Fortunately, with everyone's efforts, we were able to avert the disaster. However, the price that our heavenly Chen continent paid was not small. Only a quarter of the warriors who went to the Heavenly River continent with us came back alive. The rest fell in the Heavenly River continent. This is very sad. After this incident, we old fellows have thought about it again and again. We want to gather all the forces of the Heavenly River continent and the Heavenly Churn continent to establish a new sect so that everyone on the two continents can have a better cultivation environment. Everyone will have the possibility of becoming a powerhouse so that the past will not repeat itself. The Saint of the Nine Heavens finally spoke about the establishment of a new sect. The reason why the Saint of the Nine Heavens was asked to speak instead of Shao Xing and the other three was because of the situation of the Heavenly Chen continent. After all, compared to Shao Xing and the other three, the Saint of the Nine Heavens was definitely more prestigious in the Heavenly Chen continent. This had nothing to do with strength. It was entirely because the people of the Heavenly Chen continent did not know Randang Kozii and the other three. As the Saint of the Nine Heavens finished speaking, everyone looked at each other. Establishing a new sect was something no one had expected. Naturally, some people were happy while others were sad. However, the Saint of the Nine Heavens did not care about this. After he finished speaking, the Saint of Pill Cloud, Saint of Mutian, Saint of Heavenly Elixir, and the others all spoke up. The saints spoke one after another, clarifying the necessity of establishing a new sect. At the same time, they clearly told everyone that the establishment of a new sect was inevitable. No one had the ability to stop it. Whether it was the Heavenly Chun continent or the Heavenly River continent, a new sect was needed to control both continents. This was beneficial for everyone. The saints supported the reward of establishing a new sect. Hearing this, the powerhouses of the major families and sects below all had their own thoughts. They were constantly thinking about the establishment of a new sect. They repeatedly weighed the pros and cons in their hearts, but on the surface no one dared to refute. After all, it was the saints who had spoken this time. Anyone with a brain would obviously not refute the saints in front of everyone at this time. Otherwise, they would be asking for trouble. No one refuted. Of course, no one expressed their support. The saints had obviously expected this. Therefore, after the saints finished speaking, the 7 major forces, led by the 9 Heavens Palace, quickly made clear that they were willing to fully support the establishment of a new sect. The 7 major forces had clearly expressed their support for the reward of establishing a new sect. In this regard, the people of the major families and sects were not stupid. They knew that this was the means of the saints. After all, the 7 major forces were under the control of the saints. Since the establishment of a new sect was proposed by the saints, what reason did the 7 major forces have not to support it? However, even though the 7 major forces had already expressed their stance, everyone still had doubts in their hearts. The most important question was the balance of the pros and cons. It was undeniable that after the establishment of a new sect, there would be benefits, but there would also be disadvantages. Once the new sect was established, all the clans and sects present would have to disband and join the new sect unconditionally. That meant that the former leaders of the major families and sects would have their power taken away unconditionally. Besides, with their status, they didn't know what benefits they would receive after joining the new sect. They didn't know anything yet, but they had to give up their power and disband their own sect. That made them uncomfortable. The ruler of the continent of the 9 Heavens said, as if he knew what they were thinking, "Actually, you don't need to worry. After joining the new sect, I can guarantee you that you will receive more cultivation resources than you do now. Besides, after the establishment of the new sect, your sects and clans don't have to disband. You can continue to be the leaders of your clans and sections. Talented disciples of your clans and sects will also have the opportunity to join the new sect and receive better cultivation resources. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 945. Shao Xing and the others knew that the rewards of the new sect would affect the interests of the great sects and clans. Therefore, they had already come up with a plan. They wanted to use the situation of the Tianhe continent as a reference to establish the new sect. They didn't need to disband their sects and clans. To put it bluntly, after the new sect was established, those sects and clans would be external sections. They would still manage them, just like the relationship between the ancient holy sect and Tianfeng Xingzong back in the Tianhe continent. Of course, in order to manage them more efficiently, after the new sect was established, the names of those sects and clans had to be changed. At the same time, there were many rules to manage those external sects, but the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds hadn't said anything yet. They had to take things one step at a time. As expected, when the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds said that, everybody's expressions softened. It wasn't difficult to accept. They could continue to be the patriarch of their respective clans, and at the same time, they could have a powerful backer. They couldn't refuse. Everybody's biggest worries were dispelled. Very quickly, many people expressed their willingness to support the establishment of the new sect. When the saints of the Nine Clouds saw that, they smiled. As expected, as long as it didn't affect their interests, they wouldn't refuse. But maybe they didn't know that it wasn't easy to become an external sect of the new sect. The new sect had many rules to restrict external sections. He had achieved the desired result. Seeing that no one was against it anymore, the banquet had come to a perfect end. Actually, the saints already had a detailed plan for the rewards of the new sect. They didn't need to say much about the external sects and clans. They just needed to change their names. It wasn't too troublesome. As for the inner sect, according to the vision of Shao Xing and the other great ancestors, the inner sect would be composed of the 7 overlords of the Tiantian continent, the ancient saints sect, the heavenly saints sect, and the sun saints sect of the Tianhe continent. One thing worth mentioning was that the 3 great sects of the ancient sacred sect included outer sects like the heavenly wind saint. When the time came, all these outer sects would be merged into the new sect. The 7 overlords and the 3 sacred sects combined to form the inner sect of the new sect, and the small sects and clans on the 2 continents formed the outer sect. In this way, the general framework of the new sect was formed. After the announcement of the establishment of the new sect, the banquet ended not long after. Everyone present also left the Sky Sword Peak one after another. After Shao Chun and the rest returned to their residence, Shao Chun, Qin Shuru, and the other 2 ladies did not immediately rest because they had drunk a lot of wine. Instead, they leisurely drank tea and chatted in the garden. Gu Lingji. When he heard that, Shao Chun nodded with a smile. But I didn't expect those people to agree so readily today. Gu Lingyao said with a smile after hearing Shao Chun's words. She was a smart girl. This little girl was very clever. Her words sounded innocent, but Shao Chun knew that this little girl had already guessed that there would be a large-scale purge when the new sect was established in the future. When that time came, it was unknown how many of the clan leaders and sect leaders would still be alive. In fact, this was normal. When the saints established the new sect, they would establish an internal sect and an external sect. The existing large sects and clans would form the entire external sect system. However, although they were external sects, they still had to obey the management of the new sect. When the time came, the power of these family and clan leaders would be weakened. Therefore, there would naturally be people who wouldn't agree. Shao Chun guessed that this time, Shao Xing and the other 4 ancestors would never let the new sect go beyond their control, especially the large number of external sections. Therefore, when the time came, the consequences of those who didn't agree could be imagined. Of course, this was unavoidable. After all, they had spent so much effort. They certainly couldn't let the new sect be divided. This was absolutely not allowed. Moreover, from now on, there could only be one voice in the Tianhe continent and the Tianqian continent. This was for sure. So, naturally, there would be bloodshed. Xiao Qin shook his head with a wry smile. These things weren't for him to think about. Anyway, when the time came, there would naturally be someone to deal with it. Xiao Qin didn't need to worry. The establishment of the new sect was thus decided. Although there were still many things that hadn't been clarified, it didn't hinder anything. The road had to be taken one step at a time. Early the next morning, Xiao Qin was cultivating in the courtyard when the Nine Heavens Saint came to visit. He said that the ancestors wanted to see him. Hearing that Xiao Xing and the others wanted to see him, Xiao Qin didn't say much. He immediately rushed to their residence. On the mountain behind Nine Heavens Palace, Xiao Qin met Xiao Xing and the others. Seeing Xiao Qin arrive, Xiao Xing pointed to the bamboo chair beside him, indicating for Xiao Qin to sit down, and then said with a smile, "Little guy, we're going to go into seclusion today. After we break through to the quasi-saint realm, we'll help you break through to the Tao Emperor realm." Xiao Xing and the others were preparing to go into seclusion to break through to the quasi-saint realm. Xiao Qin wasn't surprised by this and nodded in response. Seeing this, Xiao Xing continued. Also, we plan to set up the headquarters of the new sect on the Tianqian continent. After all, you know the situation on the Tianhe continent. It's not suitable to establish a new sect. They planned to establish the new sect on the Tianqian continent. In this regard, Xiao Qin was a little confused at first, but he soon figured it out. In the previous battle with the demon race, the Tianhe continent was basically ruined. All kinds of heavenly materials and earthly treasures were mined without limit. At this time, almost no treasures could be found on the entire Tianhe continent. Because of the consumption of the battle, the cultivation environment on the Tianhe continent had become very poor. It was far inferior to the current Tianqian continent. Therefore, it was understandable that Xiao Xing and the others wanted to establish the new sect on the Tianqian continent. Nodding, he agreed with the decision of the four ancestors. After chatting for a while, Xiao Qin bid farewell and left. Xiao Xing and the others also went to the land of origin to start breaking through to the quasi-saint realm. There was no need to worry about Xiao Xing and the others breaking through to the quasi-saint realm. With the accumulation of the four of them in the saint realm, breaking through to the quasi-saint realm was a certainty. Now that they had the power of origin, they believed that the four of them would be able to complete the breakthrough soon. Moreover, Xiao Xing also said that this breakthrough to the quasi-saint realm would take at least 1 month and 2 months. At the same time, Randang Kozai and the others had also sent people back to the Tianhe continent and asked the powerhouses of the Tianhe continent to lead the disciples of the Tianhe continent to the Tianqian continent to prepare to establish the new sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. This chapter ends. Chapter 946. The headquarters of the new sect would be established in the Tianqian continent. As for the Tianhe continent, it would be enough to leave some people to guard it. There was no need to worry about the safety of the Sky River continent, because once the new sect was established, it would naturally build a cross-realm teleportation array between the two continents. Therefore, if anything happened to the Sky River continent, the Saints could use this cross-realm teleportation array to rush to the Sky River continent. It could be said that Xiao Xing and the other three had already considered all kinds of matters regarding the establishment of the new sect. After returning to his residence, Xiao Qin saw Qinyao, who had been waiting for him, as soon as he entered the door. Qinyao bowed to Xiao Qin and said sweetly, "Young master, master and madam are looking for you." The master and madam that Qinyao mentioned were naturally Xiao Qing and Bai Ryu. Hearing this, Xiao Qin smiled and said, "Okay, I'll go over now." Xiao Qin didn't know why his parents were looking for him, but he still went straight to the backyard and came to the courtyard where Xiao Qing and Bai Ryu lived. As soon as he entered, Shao Chen saw Shao Qing and Bai Ruiyue enjoying the cool air in the courtyard. At the same time, there was a middle-aged man sitting beside Shao Qing. Shao Chen also knew this person. If he counted, he should be Shao Chen's uncle and Shao Qing's cousin. His name was Shao Muqin, the current master of the Shao family. Seeing Shao Chen walking over, Shao Qing laughed and scolded, "You little brat, where did you run off to so early in the morning? Your uncle is here, but you didn't come to greet him." "Father, mother, and uncle, good day." Hearing Shao Qing's laughter, Shao Chen also smiled bitterly and greeted the three of them. Seeing this, Shao Muqin was at a loss. He personally got up and helped Shao Chen up and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you for so many years. Chen'er has grown up, haha." Shao Chen didn't have much influence on Shao Muqin. However, in his memory, Shao Muqin was the person who had the best relationship with his father, Shao Qing. Although the two of them were only cousins, they had played together since they were young. In terms of relationship, they were even closer than biological brothers. It was precisely because of this that Shao Chen agreed to let Shao Muqin become the head of the Shao family. After all, although Shao Chen did not have any thoughts about the Shao clan, it was still his own clan, after all. The person in charge naturally had to be someone close to his family, or someone who he could command. That was the only way to make it work. Moreover, Shao Muqin had indeed managed the Shao family well over the years. Therefore, Shao Chen was quite satisfied with Shao Muqin as the head of the family. After praising Shao Chen with a smile, Shao Muqin enthusiastically pulled Shao Chen to the pavilion and sat down. At the same time, Bai Ruiyue also spoke up. "Chen'er, your father and I plan to pay a visit to the Shao family. It's been so many years, it's time to go back and take a look." She asked Shao Chen to come here mainly for this matter. Hearing this, Shao Chen nodded and said, "Yes, it's time to go back and take a look. It just so happens that I have nothing to do during this time, so I'll go back with my parents." He knew that his parents were homesick, and it just so happened that Shao Xing and the other three were in seclusion. Shao Chen also had nothing to do, so he agreed to go back to the Shao family with his parents. Hearing Shao Chen's words, Bai Ruiyue was naturally very happy. They agreed to set off tomorrow. After that, Shao Chen chatted with his parents and Shao Muqin for a while before leaving. After returning to his courtyard, Shao Chen told Qin Shuru and the other two girls about going to the Shao family. The three girls immediately said that they wanted to go together. After all, they had nothing to do in Nine Firmaments Palace. Early the next morning, they prepared to set off. However, there were a lot of people going with them. Shao Chen did not expect that just Shao Chen's family alone had more than 10 people. Shao Chen, Shao Qing, Bai Ruiyue, Qin Shuru and the other two girls, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the other two maids. In addition, Long Qing, Chen Ling, and Chen Yu had heard the news from somewhere and had rushed over early, saying that they wanted to go to Lingshan County with Shao Chen. There were a lot of people going with them. The group left Nine Firmaments Palace in a grandiose manner. As they did not have anything to do, they were not in a hurry. Along the way, they stopped and visited many places in the heavenly Chen mainland. Along the way, they fulfilled Shao Chen's promise. He brought Chen Yu and the other three girls to visit the heavenly Chen mainland. This made Chen Yu and the others very happy. Just like that, they traveled and visited the Lingshan County. It took them an entire month to reach the Lingshan County. It was a remote place located in the easternmost part of the heavenly Chen mainland. However, the present Lingshan County was very different from before. Although it was located in a remote area, the Lingshan County was extremely famous in the heavenly Chen mainland. The reason for that was because the Shao family of Lingshan County was once a sacred clan. Additionally, in this generation, Shao Chen, a monstrous genius, had appeared. After not returning for several decades, the Lingshan County had changed greatly. It had become much more prosperous. The small cities that were once there had now become large and bustling cities. The area had expanded greatly and the city was bustling with activity. That was especially true for the Lingshan County, where the Shao family resided. It was extremely prosperous, in no way inferior to the few great cities in the divine central region. Compared to before, the area of the Lingshan County city had expanded by more than 10 times. Around the original old city, a larger new city had been built. At the same time, as this was the Shao family's headquarters, warriors from all over the world had gathered here. These people came from all over the world. Some came here to travel and experience the power of the sacred clan. Some wanted to become a consecrator of the Shao family. There were even some who directly moved their families to the Lingshan County city, intending to settle down here. Regardless of their motives, the current Lingshan County city could be said to be the most popular city in the entire Heavenly Chen mainland. Without disturbing the others, Shao Chen and the others entered the city through the city gates like ordinary people and strolled along the streets of the Lingshan County city. It had been a long time since he returned home. Shao Chen felt a myriad of emotions as he looked at the unfamiliar yet familiar Lingshan County city in front of him. One must remember that when he was young, when he was only in his teens, he walked out of the small Lingshan County city. At that time, Shao Chen was still a fledgling. It was from here that Shao Chen embarked on the path of martial arts. It could be said that Lingshan County City was the place where Shao Chen was born. It was also the starting point for him to embark on the path of martial arts. It was also his first time in the Lingshan County City. Gu Lingyao was very excited. She surrounded Shao Chen and chattered non-stop. Gu Lingyao's lively and cute appearance made Bai Rui very fond of her. Unconsciously, she began to tell everyone about Shao Chen's childhood. Being able to listen to this evildoer's childhood story naturally whetted everyone's appetite. Soon, not only Gu Lingyao, but even Qin Shuru, Fairy of 100 Flowers, Chun Ling, and Long Qing gathered around Bai Rui and listened attentively to her story. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 947. Everyone unknowingly gathered around Bai Rui and listened to her talk about Shao Chen's childhood. In fact, there was nothing much to say about Shao Chen's childhood. Compared to children of the same age, Shao Chen was very mature. He was already very sensible when he was 5 or 6 years old. Moreover, Shao Qing and Bai Rui did not have to worry about his cultivation. Shao Chen was able to arrange his time in an orderly manner. Moreover, Shao Chen showed great talent when he first came into contact with martial arts cultivation. At that time, as a large family in Lingshan County, Shao Qing specially hired many teachers for Shao Chen. However, these teachers did not stay in the Shao family for long. The reason was very simple. Shao Chen's progress was too fast. In the end, these teachers basically had nothing to teach him. Thinking about it, when Shao Chen was young, Lingshan County was definitely the poorest place in the Heavenly Chen continent. The teachers who could be hired here definitely had very low cultivation and knowledge. Therefore, they did not have any real ability to teach Shao Chen. Shao Chen did not have too many embarrassing incidents when he was young. Perhaps there was nothing to talk about. In the end, Bai Rui simply told everyone about Shao Chen's bedwetting when he was young. I still remember when this kid wet his bed for the first time. Bai Rui said excitedly. Bai Rui said excitedly. But at this time, Shao Chen couldn't help but interrupt. Mother, why are you talking about this? When did it happen? Yo, our great holy son Shao actually wet his bed. I thought you were a natural prodigy. Haha. Seeing Shao Chen's face turn red, Chen Yu immediately teased him with a mischievous smile. It was very normal for a child to wet his bed. Facing Chen Yu's teasing, Shao Chen said snappily, "You say it as if you have never wet your bed before." "Of course I have, but we are just ordinary people. How can we compare to a monster like you? Speaking of which, after hearing about your childhood, I feel that you are much more realistic. Sigh, it seems that there is no way to be perfect. Ha! Facing Xiao Chen's rebuttal, Chen Yu laughed indifferently. Perhaps it was because Xiao Chen was usually too perfect. Now that they heard about Xiao Chen's childhood, everyone felt that it was more realistic. After all, no matter how heaven-defying Xiao Chen was, no matter how high his talent was, he was still an ordinary human like everyone else. He did not have 3 heads and 6 arms. However, even though they were teasing Xiao Chen, there were still some things that made them depressed. Especially when they found out that Xiao Chen actually came from a small city in the corner of the city. Everyone could not help but admire Xiao Chen's talent once again. Imagine if Xiao Chen's birth was better, or if Xiao Chen was born in the Tianhe continent, then Xiao Chen's current achievements would be much higher than now. It could be said that during Xiao Chen's childhood, the Xiao family could not give Xiao Chen much help. They only gave Xiao Chen some enlightenment. After that, Xiao Chen relied on himself. When he was in his teens, he left home alone and traveled all the way from Lingshan County until he entered the Eastern Sword Pavilion. Xiao Chen walked step by step alone. As they chatted, they unknowingly arrived at the entrance of the Xiao Mansion. It wasn't as dazzling as the Qin Mansion. Although the Xiao Mansion had been renovated over the years and its area had expanded a lot, it was still very simple, and there wasn't anything luxurious. Xiao Chen was very satisfied with the Xiao family's low profile. The group walked into the Xiao residence. After receiving the news that Xiao Qing and the others had returned, the Xiao family quickly rushed to the front yard. After so many years of development, the Xiao family's population had increased a lot. Many of the collateral relatives who had been wandering outside had also moved back to the Xiao residence. Moreover, many of the people of Xiao Chen's generation already had their own children after so many years. The population had increased a lot compared to before. Under the crowd's escort, Xiao Chen and his family arrived at the main hall. After everyone took their seats, it was inevitable that they would be enthusiastic. They chatted with each other and talked about the past. For a time, Xiao Qing and Bai Riyue were both moved and their eyes turned red. When they heard that the small courtyard where the family used to live was still preserved, Bai Rui could not help but go to the small courtyard where they used to live, accompanied by a few madams, to visit. In the Xiao residence, Xiao Qing and Bai Riyue could not help but recall the regretful past. Over the years, because they had such an outstanding son like Xiao Chen, the old couple's days could be said to be extremely rich and colorful. After experiencing so many things, people would naturally be nostalgic. Regarding this, Xiao Chen was also deeply touched. It was rare for them to return to the Xiao residence. Everyone stayed in the Xiao residence, and was not in a hurry to return to Nine Firmaments Palace. Living in the courtyard that was once incomparably familiar to them, it was as if time had flowed back to when they were young. Someone once said that the home was everyone's harbor. Now, Xiao Chen finally understood the true meaning of this sentence. In the Xiao residence, facing the smiles of the clansmen every day, accompanying his parents in his free time, and teasing his nephews and nieces, his days were extremely comfortable. It was as if he had lived in the Xiao residence for half a month. On this day, Xiao Chen sat in the courtyard and drank tea as usual. Beside him were the 3 women of Qin Shuru and a few other clansmen of the Xiao residence. They could be considered as Xiao Chen's cousins. Not far away, there were more than a dozen of Xiao Chen's nephews and nieces making a scene. Xiao Chen had a sincere smile on his face as he looked at his nephews and nieces, who were only 4 or 5 years old. This time, Xiao Chen naturally did not come back empty-handed. He also gave many good things to the clansmen of the Xiao residence, especially his nephews and nieces. Xiao Chen was not stingy. He even personally cleansed the marrow of these little fellows. With this, when they started to step onto the path of martial arts in the future, it would be easier for them. Facing these innocent children, Qin Shuru and the other 2 women at the side seemed to have completely changed. Their eyes were filled with envy. The meaning was obvious. They also wanted to give birth to a son and 2 daughters for Shao Chun and have a taste of what it was like to be a parent. Just as everyone was enjoying themselves, without any warning, 4 heavenly punishments suddenly descended from the sky in the central divine realm, which was extremely far away from Lingshan Commandery. The power of these 4 heavenly punishments was extremely terrifying. Even a saint would pale in the face of these 4 heavenly punishments. In the sky, 4 huge spatial black holes appeared. Through the holes, one could see thick bolts of heavenly lightning crisscrossing within these 4 spatial black holes. A terrifying pressure immediately swept across the land, causing countless people to be shocked. They could not help but look up at the sky, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 948. When the 4 heavenly punishments appeared at the same time, the pressure from the 4 heavenly punishments made one's hair stand on end. Almost everyone in the heavenly Chun continent could feel the terrifying pressure from the 4 heavenly punishments. Even though Shao Chen was in Lingshan Commandery City, he could still feel the heavenly punishments from the distant central divine territory. Such heavenly punishments far exceeded the heavenly punishments of the saint stage. There was only one explanation. The 4 heavenly punishments were formed when Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs broke through to the quasi-saint stage. It had been almost 2 months since Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs went into seclusion. According to Shao Xing, it was indeed time for them to break through to the quasi-saint stage. Shao Qin gazed in the direction of the central divine territory. Although he couldn't see the sky of the central divine territory from where he was, he could clearly feel the terrifying heavenly punishments. In contrast to Shao Chen's calm demeanor, the other members of the Shao family, as well as the children who were only 5 or 6 years old, were all horrified. The children hid in the arms of the adults and looked at the sky with their innocent eyes from time to time. However, it was only a glance before they buried their heads back into their parents' arms. "Cousin, this?" one of the Shao family members asked Shao Chen in horror. Shao Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry, it'll be fine." Shao Chen knew that this was caused by Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs breaking through to the quasi-saint stage, so he wasn't worried. Seeing this, the Shao family members heaved a sigh of relief. However, the grave expression on their faces showed that they were still very nervous. No one in the Tiantian continent had ever seen a quasi-saint-level heavenly punishment. Even the saints had never seen a quasi-saint-level heavenly punishment. Therefore, after the 4 heavenly punishment appeared, several figures appeared around the 4 heavenly punishment. They were the 9 firmaments saint and the others. No one dared to get close to the heavenly punishments and could only watch from afar. However, even though they were far enough away, the 9 heavens saint and the others were still scared witless. Good heavens! If this were to happen to me, wouldn't I be reduced to ashes? Pill Cloud Saint laughed foolishly after taking a sip of wine. Hearing this, the heavenly Pill Saint snorted in annoyance. "You're so useless." As his wife, the heavenly Pill Saint did not give the Pill Cloud Saint any face at all. However, the Pill Cloud Saint did not care about this at all. His gaze was fixed on the 4 heavenly punishments in the sky, and he would occasionally take a sip of wine. Saints appeared saint stage. 4 heavenly punishments of the quasi-saint stage heavenly punishments. 4 heavenly punishments of the heavens saint stage punishments of the quasi-saint stage heavenly punishments. The 4 figures did not exude any terrifying aura. They were just like ordinary people. However, they gave off a feeling that they were the rulers of the world. It was as if they just stood there and did nothing. The 4 of them were the masters of the world. These 4 people were none other than Shao Xing and the other 3. Their cultivations had already broken through from the sage-accomplished realm to the beginning of the quasi-sage realm. Shao Xing and the other 3 appeared at this time. Their gazes were fixed on the 4 heavenly punishments in the sky. Shao Xing said faintly with a wry smile on his face, The sky law of the quasi-saint realm really can't be underestimated. Compared to the heavenly punishment of the sage realm, the heavenly punishment of the quasi-sage realm was many times stronger. Anyone below the quasi-sage realm would definitely die upon contact with such a heavenly punishment. However, even though this was the case, Shao Xing and the other three had all broken through to the quasi-sage realm. Perhaps only they knew that the difference in their strength was like the difference between heaven and earth. The four of them had been trapped in the sage accomplished realm for thousands of years. They had long possessed the qualifications to break through to the quasi-sage realm. Now they finally got what they wanted. Their strength was absolutely incomparable to before. They had finally entered the ranks of the quasi-sage realm. The improvement of their cultivation gave Shao Xing and the other three more confidence when facing the heavenly punishment of the quasi-sage realm. As Shao Xing's voice fell, 4 thick heavenly thunderbolts struck down from the 4 black holes in the sky as if they had been provoked. They went straight for Shao Xing and the other three. The heavenly punishment arrived as scheduled. In the face of the heavenly thunderbolts, a terrifying aura erupted from Shao Xing and the other three. As soon as this aura appeared, the expressions of Saint Jiuxiao and the others in the distance changed. Saint Mu Tian couldn't help but murmur softly. Is this the coercion of the quasi-sage realm? As soon as the coercion of the quasi-sage realm was released, the heavens and the earth seemed to change color. All the saints' expressions changed drastically, and they couldn't help but reveal a look of yearning in their eyes. Everyone felt that the saint realm was already an unattainable existence. However, they didn't know that the 3 realms of the saint realm, the sage realm, the quasi-sage realm, and the great sage realm, could be said to be a whole new level with each step. Without personal experience, one would never know how big the gap between the 3 realms of the saint realm was. For example, in the 3 realms of the saint realm, every breakthrough of a major realm was like a sublimation of life level. It could be said that the difference between the 2 realms was simply not on the same level. Saints were very strong, but in front of a quasi-sage, they couldn't make any waves at all. They could be suppressed with a flip of their hand. This was the difference between a quasi-sage and a saint. This was also why Shao Xing and the other old ancestors secretly prayed when they faced the northern demon continent. They hoped that there was no quasi-sage in the northern demon continent. Otherwise, no matter how hard the Tianhe continent struggled, it would be impossible for them to win, let alone the 8 years of bloody war that followed. It was simply a fool's dream. The coercion of Shao Xing and the other 3 swept across the earth, forming an equal force with the heavenly punishment. At the same time, in the face of the 4 heavenly thunderbolts, Shao Xing and the other 3 made their moves one after another, forcibly colliding with the heavenly thunderbolts. In the face of the heavenly punishment, there was no need to think about escaping, because there was no way to escape. The only way was to resist it head-on. If one could withstand the heavenly punishment, it would mean success. Of course, if one couldn't withstand the heavenly punishment, they would only end up dead. The first heavenly punishment did not cause any serious injuries to Shao Xing and the other 3, but this was just the beginning. Soon, the second heavenly punishment fell. This second heavenly punishment was twice as powerful as the first. Moreover, the color of the heavenly punishment had turned dark blue. It looked like a thunder dragon, roaring as it rushed out of the black hole and rushed straight toward Shao Xing and the other 3. The power of laws surrounded them, and terrifying spiritual fluctuations swept across the sky. Once again, Shao Xing and the other 3 collided fiercely with the heavenly punishment. The terrifying aftershock spread in all directions, and the powerful shock wave destroyed everything within a radius of 100 miles. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 949. It was as if the end of the world had come. As the second heavenly punishment fell, everything in the surroundings turned into ashes. Not even a blade of grass grew on the ground, as if it had been cut by a knife, leaving only a vast expanse of land that stretched as far as the eye could see. 2 heavenly punishments in a row had already stunned Saint Jiuxiao and the others. They were both heavenly punishments, but the heavenly punishments of the quasi-saint realm and the heavenly punishments of the saint realm were like fathers and sons. There was no comparison at all. After the baptism of the second heavenly punishment, Shao Xing and the others were also seriously injured. It could be seen that even though the 4 of them were quasi-saints, it was still difficult for them to resist the heavenly punishment. They gritted their teeth and persevered. Then, when the second heavenly punishment fell, the third one was already brewing. Saint Danyun laughed heartily when he felt that the heavenly might in the 4 spatial black holes had not decreased, but increased instead. Again? Does the quasi-saint realm have 3 heavenly punishments in a row? There was only 1 heavenly punishment in the saint realm, but there were 3 in the quasi-saint realm, and the power was even more terrifying. As the third heavenly punishment fell, the sky seemed to have lost its color in an instant. The whole sky was illuminated by the lightning, and the sun could not be seen. Black thunder. The third heavenly punishment was actually a black heavenly thunder, whistling out from the spatial black holes. Faced with the third heavenly punishment, Shao Xing smiled bitterly and helplessly. "Does this mean that you don't want me to live? Don't talk nonsense. Attack with all your might. I don't want to collect your corpse again." Hearing Shao Xing's complaint, Saint Ice Lotus, who was not far away, said grumpily. Then, she stared at the black thunder coming from the sky. Her whole body tensed up, and she was ready to attack with all her might at any time. Faced with the third heavenly punishment of black thunder, Shao Xing and the others did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. Soon, the black thunder arrived as expected, and fiercely bombarded Shao Xing and the others. With just one touch, the defense around Shao Xing and the others was torn apart layer by layer like a piece of white paper. Regardless of whether it was spiritual energy or the power of laws, they were all as fragile as paper as they were torn apart layer by layer. Then, the black lightning ruthlessly struck the 4 people's bodies. Blood splattered everywhere, and their bodies felt like they were about to be torn apart. There was no other way. Shao Xing and the other 3 could only grit their teeth and persevere, trying their best to retain the last trace of consciousness. Around 10 minutes later, the black lightning slowly dissipated. The heavenly might from the 4 black holes in the sky also slowly dissipated. Clearly, the heavenly punishment had ended. Shao Xing and the other 3 naturally felt extremely fortunate. The third bolt of heavenly punishment of black lightning had already severely injured them. If there was another bolt of heavenly punishment of black lightning, there was no doubt that the 4 of them would be blasted to death on the spot. The injuries on their bodies were extremely serious. They were already secondary saints, but right now, Shao Xing and the other 3 looked extremely miserable. Fortunately, they had managed to survive the divine punishment without any mishap. As for the injuries on their bodies, they would recover after a few days of rest. The attack of the divine punishment was different from other attacks. It seemed that Shao Chun and the others were on their last breaths, but in fact, they did not suffer any internal injuries. The divine punishment was God's punishment for warriors, but at the same time, it was also a test. After passing it, there would be unexpected benefits. At the same time, the baptism of the divine punishment could also temper the physical body and stabilize the foundation. There were many benefits. At the same time, the injuries caused by the divine punishment would strangely not harm the warriors' meridians. As long as they did not die, they would recover very quickly. The black holes in the sky slowly closed, and Shao Xing and the other 3 were on the verge of collapse. Fortunately, the Saint of 9 Heavens hurried over from afar and supported Shao Xing and the others. "Ancestor, are you all right?" the Saint of 9 Heavens asked with concern as he supported Shao Xing. Faced with the Saint of 9 Heavens' question, Shao Xing forced a smile and said, "I'm all right. Let's go back first." The divine punishment had passed, and Xiao Xing and the other 3 had survived safely. As such, the 4 of them could be considered to have truly become secondary saints. Hearing Xiao Xing's words, the victor of 9 heavens nodded. Then, under the care of a group of saints, the group quickly returned to 9 heavens' palace. Because of the divine punishment, Xiao Xing and the other 3 spent the next few days in seclusion on the mountain behind 9 heavens' palace. After 10 days, Xiao Xing and the other 3 finally came out of seclusion. There were no more injuries on their bodies, and their complexions were healthy. Because they had broken through to secondary saint, the 4 of them looked much younger. Their skin was as white as a baby's, making them look like young men and women in their 20s. This was especially true for Prime Saint Ice Lotus and Prime Saint Mengjie. They were actually old monsters who had lived for thousands of years. However, judging from their appearances, they were about the same age as Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls. Xiao Xing was the same. If no one said anything, who would have thought that Xiao Xing was actually Xiao Chen's ancestor? Judging from their appearances, the 2 of them were like brothers. Compared to Xiao Xing and the other 2, Randeng Kozai had a different personality. His skin was white, but his white hair hadn't changed much. He gave people a different feeling, as if he was a Dao expert. After surviving the divine punishment, the 4 of them had completely stabilized their newly broken secondary saint realm with the help of the divine punishment. Compared to 10 days ago, their auras were more profound and restrained. If they didn't deliberately release it, even saints would find it difficult to sense the auras of Xiao Xing and the other 3. At first glance, the 4 of them were no different from ordinary people. With a smile on his face, Xiao Xing looked at Prime Saint Ice Lotus and the other 3. Let's go and find Xiao Chen first. After the 4 of them had broken through, the next step was to help Xiao Chen cleanse his body and break through his cultivation. Hearing this, Prime Saint Ice Lotus and the other 2 nodded slightly. Since they had decided to support Xiao Chen to become the first saint of the new sect, Xiao Chen naturally couldn't just be a Dao sovereign. No matter what, he had to be a Dao emperor. Otherwise, wouldn't he be embarrassing the new sect? Knowing that Xiao Chen was now in the Xiao clan of Lingshan City, Xiao Xing and the other 3 didn't inform anyone and directly rushed to Lingshan City. With the speed of the 4 secondary saints, it was almost as if they were riding a teleportation formation. In the blink of an eye, they appeared in the small courtyard where Xiao Chen lived without disturbing the Xiao clan. While he was cultivating, Xiao Xing and the other 3 suddenly arrived. Xiao Chen also put away his sword and said with a smile, "Ancestor, congratulations on breaking through to the secondary saint stage." It was obvious that Xiao Xing and the other 3 were already secondary saints. Hearing this, Xiao Xing scolded with a smile, "All right, you're being hypocritical. Let's not talk nonsense. Find a cultivation room. The 4 of us will cleanse your body and help you break through." Without wasting any time, they went straight to the point. Hearing this, Xiao Chen led the 4 to the cultivation room. In the cultivation room, Xiao Chen sat cross-legged on a cushion while Xiao Xing and the other 3 stood around Xiao Chen. They looked at each other and nodded slightly. Then, the 4 of them acted at the same time. For a time, 4 streams of pure spiritual energy directly entered Xiao Chen's body and began to flow along Xiao Chen's meridians. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 950. Xiao Chen was probably the only one who could enjoy the treatment of 4 quasi-sages working together. He felt 4 different spiritual powers flowing through his body, but he did not feel uncomfortable at all. On the contrary, he felt very comfortable. These 4 spiritual powers were not absorbed by Xiao Chen. Of course, even if Xiao Chen wanted to, he could not do it. These were the spiritual powers of quasi-sages. Under the control of Xiao Xing and the other 3, these 4 spiritual powers slowly cleansed the impurities in Xiao Chen's meridians. With the circulation of these 4 spiritual powers, the impurities in Xiao Chen's meridians were constantly forced out of his body. Soon, Xiao Chen's skin was covered by a layer of black liquid that emitted a foul smell. Don't underestimate this small marrow cleansing. It should be known that using one's own spiritual power to cleanse someone's marrow was not a simple matter. Not only did it require extremely high control of spiritual power, but it also required a sufficiently domineering spiritual power. Neither of these two aspects could be omitted. If the spiritual power was not domineering enough, it would not be able to force out the impurities in the body. If the spiritual power was not controlled well enough, it was very likely that it would hurt Xiao Chen instead. This whole process did not allow the slightest bit of carelessness. It should be known that Xiao Chen now had the spiritual powers of 4 quasi-sages in his body. If there was a slight mistake, the spiritual powers of the quasi-sage realm could instantly turn Xiao Chen's meridians and essence into a completely useless person. Therefore, the marrow cleansing for Xiao Chen was an extremely strenuous task for Xiao Xing and the other 3. If it were not for the fact that they wanted Xiao Chen to have the strength of the first Holy Sun, the 4 of them obviously would not have done this. However, in just a short while, the foreheads of Xiao Xing and the other 3 were covered with fine beads of sweat. It was obvious that the 4 of them had consumed a lot of spiritual power. This lasted for a whole hour. Then, Xiao Xing and the other 3 withdrew their spiritual powers at the same time. At the same time, Xiao Chen also slowly opened his eyes. He could clearly feel that his body seemed to have relaxed a lot. He looked at Xiao Xing and the other 3 and smiled happily. Ancestor, you're really amazing. The effect is much better than the marrow cleansing saint elixir. However, why do I feel that the impurities in my body have not been completely removed? You brat, the 4 of us are attacking at the same time. How can the marrow cleansing saint elixir compare to us? Moreover, do you think we can get rid of the impurities in your body in one go? Stop talking nonsense and rest for a day. We'll continue tomorrow. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Xiao Xing snapped. He then sat down cross-legged and began to regulate his breathing. In just 2 hours, Xiao Xing and the other 3 were exhausted, mainly because of the mental exhaustion. After all, they could not afford to make any mistake. It was impossible to completely remove the impurities in Xiao Chen's body in one go. Over the years in the Sky River continent, in order to quickly break through his cultivation, Xiao Chen had taken a lot of pills and used the help of many cultivation mystic realms. As the saying goes, too much is as bad as too little. After so many pills and cultivation mystic realms accumulated over time, the impurities naturally settled in Xiao Chen's body. Therefore, to completely cleanse Xiao Chen's body and marrow, it was not something that could be done once or twice. This was mainly due to the fact that Xiao Chen had been suppressing his cultivation for the past 8 years. He was also constantly consolidating his foundation and removing the impurities in his body. Otherwise, it would have taken even longer. In the next few days, Xiao Chen enjoyed the cleansing of his body and marrow by Xiao Xing and the other 3. In this regard, Xiao Chen was very happy, but Xiao Xing and the other 3 were exhausted. At this time, the 4 quasi-sages were sweating profusely every day. Not only did they have to help Xiao Chen cleanse his body and marrow, but they also had to give Qin Shuru and the other 2 women some benefits. Therefore, while helping Xiao Chen cleanse his body and marrow, Xiao Xing and the other 3 also helped Qin Shuru and the other 2 women consolidate their foundation. Of course, the treatment of Qin Shuru and the other 2 women naturally could not be compared to Xiao Chen. This was certain, but the 3 women had no complaints about this. Time passed day by day, and it took a full half a month for Xiao Xing and the other 3 to complete the cleansing of Xiao Chen's body and marrow. When the last cleansing was completed, the last trace of impurities in Xiao Chen's body was expelled. Xiao Chen felt as if he had been reborn. This feeling was like a baby who had just been born. His whole body was incomparably pure and clean. It was a very good feeling, but Xiao Xing and the other 3 were almost driven crazy. 10 days was a torment for them. The four of them simply gritted their teeth and persevered for 2 hours every day. Finally, they completed the cleansing of their body and marrow. Next, they helped Xiao Chun to improve his cultivation. Although Xiao Xing and the other 3 were quasi-sages, there was a certain degree of danger in forcibly improving their cultivation. Moreover, this method could only be used once at most. Otherwise, it would cause irreversible damage to Xiao Chen's foundation. They rested for 3 days in a row. On this day, Xiao Xing's group and Xiao Chen came to the cultivation room at the same time. Before they began, Xiao Xing restrained his usual casualness and spoke in an extremely serious manner. Kid, the 4 of us helping you forcefully improve your cultivation doesn't mean that it'll be a 100% success rate. So during the entire process, you must remember that you absolutely can't force it. Once you feel that you're unable to break through, you must not advance rashly. You'd rather give up than forcefully break through the barrier of the Tao Emperor realm. Otherwise, your foundation in the martial Tao will be crippled. At that time, even the 4 of us won't be able to remedy it. This was not a joke, so Xiao Xing spoke in an extremely serious manner. Forcefully improving one's cultivation was indeed too risky. Everything could only be done naturally. If he could break through, then so be it. If he couldn't, then so be it. Xiao Chen nodded heavily when he heard Xiao Xing's advice. After that, Xiao Xing's group of 4 didn't start right away. They allowed Xiao Chen to adjust his state first, and they only started after an entire 2 hours had passed. Their spirit energy entered Xiao Chen's body and helped Xiao Chen start to charge into the barrier of the Tao Emperor realm. However, Xiao Xing and the others were very careful throughout the entire process, and they didn't dare use too much strength. On the other hand, with the help of Xiao Xing's group of 4, Xiao Chen consciously observed the situation in his body carefully. Once he noticed that he couldn't continue, he would immediately stop charging into the Tao Emperor realm. Time flowed by slowly. 4 hours later, no matter if it was Xiao Chen, Xiao Xing, or the others, dense beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads, and the sweat flowed down their faces and ceaselessly dripped to the ground. At the same time, Xiao Chen finally sensed the critical factor to break through. With the help of Xiao Xing's group of 4, Xiao Chen controlled the spirit energy within his body to charge swiftly towards the barrier of the Tao Emperor realm. Bang! A muffled bang resounded from within his body, and then the barrier of the Tao Emperor realm shattered. After that, Xiao Chen's cultivation started to rise steadily. After they sensed that Xiao Chen had successfully broken through, Xiao Xing's group of 4 withdrew their spirit energy at the first possible moment, and then they slowly opened their eyes while a wisp of faint smiles appeared on the corners of their mouths. We've finally succeeded. Fortunately, Xiao Chen's accumulation during these 8 years of time was sufficiently deep. Otherwise, it would probably really be difficult for him to break through into the Tao Emperor realm. Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation. End of this chapter. Chapter 951. Actually, the actions of Xiao Xing's group of 4 had merely added fuel to the fire. If Xiao Chen himself didn't possess the ability to break through to the Tao Emperor realm, then he would definitely be unable to break through successfully as well. Of course, with the cultivations of Xiao Xing's group of 4, it wasn't that they couldn't forcefully improve Xiao Chen's cultivation to the Tao Emperor realm. However, doing so wouldn't bring any benefits, and it would even harm Xiao Chen. Because if they forcefully improved Xiao Chen's cultivation to the Tao Emperor realm, then it would be no different than pulling up a seedling to help it grow. Just as Xiao Xing had said earlier, it would cause irreversible damage to Xiao Chen's foundation in the martial Tao. At that time, it would be extremely difficult for Xiao Chen to improve further. It was naturally impossible for a holy son like Xiao Chen to destroy his future for the sake of a momentary improvement. So, Xiao Xing's group of 4 hadn't forcefully improved Xiao Chen's cultivation this time, and they were just going with the flow. If Xiao Chen possessed the ability to break through, then Xiao Xing's group of 4 would lend him a hand. On the other hand, if Xiao Chen was unable to break through, then they could only give up. Fortunately, Xiao Chen didn't disappoint them in the end, and he successfully broke through to the Tao Emperor realm. Xiao Xing's group of 4 were gratified. As for Xiao Chen himself, he was slightly excited. The Tao Emperor realm. If it was 100 years ago on the heavenly Chen continent, then he would be an overlord, the king of the entire continent. When Xiao Chen had just made a name for himself, the overlord of the Tao Emperor realm was an unreachable existence. However, all along the way, Xiao Chen had similarly attained this level. Everything seemed like a dream. Xiao Chen had unknowingly attained this level as well, and Xiao Chen was merely 100 years old this year. Perhaps 100 years of age could be considered as an extremely old age amongst ordinary people. However, 100 years of age was nothing amongst cultivators. Especially at the Tao Emperor realm, 100 years of age was practically an immature child. After exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Xiao Chen slowly opened his eyes. When he looked at Xiao Xing, the corners of his mouth unconsciously widened into a smile. The Tao Emperor realm. You've finally broken through to the Tao Emperor realm. When he saw Xiao Chen grinning like a lotus flower, Xiao Xing scolded angrily with a smile. Brat, don't be so happy. You can stay in the Xiao clan and cultivate in seclusion for the time being. Take it. As he spoke, Xiao Xing tossed a jade bottle to Xiao Chen. When Xiao Chen opened the jade bottle, he discovered that there were 20 marrow cleansing pills inside. They did not leave any pills for Xiao Chen to increase his cultivation. Xiao Xing and the other 3 left Xiao Chen only marrow cleansing pills for him to stabilize his cultivation that had just broken through. Xiao Chen was not dissatisfied with Xiao Xing and the other 3's decision. Subsequently, Xiao Xing and the other 3 gave Qin Shuru and the other 2 many pills as well. Compared to Xiao Chen, the 3 women obviously received more pills. Not only were there marrow cleansing pills, but there were also many pills that could increase cultivation. In fact, Qin Shuru and the other 2 women had also received many benefits during the time that Xiao Xing and the other 3 were here. Now that they had these pills, it was completely enough for the 3 women to break through to the Tao Master Realm in one fell swoop. After accepting the pills from Xiao Xing and the other 3, Xiao Xing looked at Xiao Chen and said, "Well, we will start to set up the new sect in the next few days. You can stay in the Xiao clan and cultivate well. When the matter of the new sect is settled, I will come back to inform you." The preparations for the establishment of the new sect were almost done. Calculating the time, the people from the Tianhe continent should have arrived. Thus, Xiao Xing and the other 3 began to set up the new sect. Of course, the first step was naturally to choose a site and build the headquarters of the new sect. In this regard, Xiao Chen naturally would not take the initiative to ask. What a joke! It was rare for him to be free, so why should he work hard? Anyway, once the new sect was established, Xiao Chen could go directly. Wasn't it easy? Xiao Xing and the other 3 completed their task. On the same day, the 4 of them left Lingshan Commandery City. Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, and the other 2 women stayed in the Xiao clan. On the second day after Xiao Xing and the other 3 left, Qin Shuru and the other 2 women went into seclusion at the same time. Xiao Chen, who had nothing to do, also began to concentrate on cultivation. Every day, in addition to the usual cultivation, he also refined the marrow-cleansing divine pills. His days were quite fulfilling. He did not care about the establishment of the new sect at all. After all, these things did not require Xiao Chen's attention. At the same time, Xiao Xing and the other 3 ancestors also decided on the location of the new sect. Xiao Chen did not know what Xiao Xing and the other 3 ancestors were thinking. Otherwise, he would have been shocked. This was because Xiao Xing and the other 3 ancestors did not intend to establish the new sect directly on the Tianqian continent. Instead, they planned to open up a separate pocket dimension on the Tianqian continent. At first glance, it did not seem difficult to open up a separate pocket dimension. At least, it was so for a quasi-sage. However, The pocket dimension that Xiao Xing and the other three ancestors planned to open up this time was much larger. According to the four ancestors' plan, the headquarters of the new sect would be directly established in this separate pocket dimension. Moreover, the cultivation secret realms of the ancient Saint sect, Heavenly Saint sect, Sun Saint sect, and the Nine Heavens divine technique would all be moved to this pocket dimension. From now on, the disciples of the new sect would carry out their daily life and cultivation in the pocket dimension. They would not need to have too much contact with the outside world. Moving the entire new sect into this pocket dimension meant that the area of this pocket dimension would naturally not be small. This would be a test for Xiao Xing and the other three ancestors. The entrance to the pocket dimension was set on the Heavenly Stellar Mountain. This Heavenly Stellar Mountain was the sacred mountain of the Tianqian continent. However, from now on, the peak of this Heavenly Stellar Mountain would be the passage for the new sect to contact the outside world. It could also be regarded as a display of the identity and status of the new sect. Without further ado, Xiao Xing and the other four ancestors began to build the new pocket dimension. The four quasi-sages worked together to create a new pocket dimension on the peak of the Heavenly Stellar Mountain. As for the entrance, it was located on the peak of the Heavenly Stellar Mountain. Xiao Xing and the other three ancestors were busy building the new pocket dimension. At the same time, the first batch of troops from the Tianhe continent finally arrived on the Tianqian continent. This time, the number of people who came was obviously greater. More than 10 starships landed on the Tianqian continent. From these starships, more than 100,000 Tianhe continent cultivators arrived on the Tianqian continent. These people were naturally very curious about the unfamiliar Tianqian continent, but now they did not have time to play around. Soon, they threw themselves into the establishment of the new sect. The establishment of the new sect was in full swing. Everyone in the Heavenly Chen continent knew that perhaps in the near future, there would be a new giant sect in the Heavenly Chen continent. It was hard to imagine the scene after the establishment of the new sect, but there was no doubt that the new sect's strength would be formidable. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of this chapter. Chapter 952. The establishment of the new sect was in full swing. As the saying goes, many hands pick up firewood, the flame grows taller. With the joint efforts of countless people, the construction of the new sect progressed very quickly. Of course, the most important thing was Xiao Xing and the other three patriarchs. It was not a simple task for them to build the new small world where the new sect would be located. Fortunately, as the new sect had just been established, they only needed to figure out the general structure first. As for the rest, it would not be a problem to slowly expand it in the future. In order to save time, Xiao Xing and the other three patriarchs naturally could not build the new small world in one go. They only built a part of it first. Then, many warriors from the Tianhe continent and the Tianqian continent entered the small world and began to build palaces and houses. It was obviously impossible to build the entire small world in one go. Therefore, Xiao Xing and the other three patriarchs cleverly chose to proceed in stages. First, they completed a part of it. After the new sect was established, they would gradually complete the other projects. In the newly constructed small world, hundreds of thousands of future disciples and elders of the new sect were working together to build everything for the new sect. Magnificent buildings rose from the ground in this new small world. At the same time, Xiao Xing and the other three patriarchs, as well as the saints, used their great magic to move some of the beautiful mountains and rivers from the outside world into this small world. For example, the 9 peaks of the former 9-Cloud Palace, as well as some of the cultivation secret realms where the 7 overlords once resided, were all moved into this small world. Even Tiangong Mountain was moved in as a decoration in this small world. The originally barren small world, with the efforts of everyone, was soon overflowing with vitality and picturesque scenery. It had become an existence similar to an immortal realm. Only a few months had passed. When they entered this small world, they were surrounded by clouds and mist. There were countless strange mountains, strange rocks, and lakes. At the same time, in the center of this small world, there were dozens of mountains that were suspended in the air using the power of talisman formations. These mountain peaks floated in the sky, as if they were the residences of immortals. At the same time, on these mountain peaks, there were lush green trees, birds chirping, and flowers fragrant. Many elegant and simple buildings stood in an intricate manner. These floating mountains were where the new sect was located. In the future, all the disciples and elders of the new sect would live and cultivate on these mountains. From afar, the dozens of mountains looked disorderly, but in fact they were extremely orderly. The outermost mountains were obviously much smaller, and in the middle, the largest mountain was obviously the center. Around the central mountain, there were a total of 10 slightly smaller mountains floating around, as if they were guarding the central mountain. After a total of half a year, the new sect was finally established. Although there was still a long way to go before it was fully established, it was already enough to meet the requirements for the establishment of the new sect. As for the remaining matters, after the new sect was established, they could slowly perfect it. The initial rewards for the new sect were completed. At the same time, on the dozens of floating mountains, many warriors from the Tianhe continent and the Tianshan continent moved in. From now on, this would be their home. It was time to start the establishment of the new sect. Now, almost all of the 7 overlords of the Tianshan continent had been moved into this small world. As for the secret realms of the ancient sacred sect, and the 3 sacred sects in the Tianhe continent, Shao Xing and the others would move all of them into this small world. There was no need for them to worry about this. On this day, on the central mountain, in a magnificent hall, all the saints, as well as Shao Xing and the other 3 great ancestors, gathered together and sat on the main seats. Shao Xing and the others looked at the saints below. Although not all the saints were present, there were still more than 30 saints gathered in this hall. After glancing at the crowd, Shao Xing said slowly, "Everyone, the establishment of the new sect is imminent. With everyone's efforts, the construction of the new sect has been preliminarily completed. We also plan to announce the establishment of the new sect to the public and hold a ceremony for the establishment of the new sect." The first stage of construction had been completed, so it was indeed time to announce the establishment of the new sect. Hearing Shao Xing's words, all the saints present nodded with a faint smile on their faces. The establishment of the new sect was expected by everyone, and they had been looking forward to this for a long time by Shao Xing. Now, after everyone's efforts, it was finally time for the establishment of the new sect. How could they not be happy? However, just as Shao Xing's voice fell, Saint Qingju, who had rushed over from the Tianhe continent, smiled and said with a slightly excited tone, "Great Ancestor, our new sect hasn't been named yet, right? There has to be a name, right?" All the work for the establishment of the new sect had been completed, but the most important thing was the name. Sure enough, after hearing Saint Qingju's words, all the saints' eyes fell on Shao Xing and the other 3 great ancestors. When it came to naming the new sect, the only people qualified to do so were naturally Shao Xing and the other 3 great ancestors. Now that the 4 of them had broken through to the quasi-saint realm, it was no exaggeration to say that Shao Xing and the others were the 4 pillars of the new sect. As long as they were still around, the new sect would not fall. Randang Kozai, who had long thought of this problem, chuckled softly as he faced the gazes of all the saints. "Naturally, we already have a name. This new sect will be called the Sacred Palace." Sacred Palace. Hearing this name, all the saints were slightly taken aback, as if they were muttering these 2 words. Sacred Palace. At first glance, these 2 words sounded very simple, but it revealed everyone's expectations for the new sect. How confident was it to directly use the word saint? Compared to the previous ancient sacred sect, heavenly sacred sect, and sun sacred sect, the 2 words sacred palace were undoubtedly much simpler, but at the same time, much more domineering. Sacred Palace was the name Shao Xing and the other three great ancestors had chosen for the new sect. At the same time, the small world where the Sacred Palace was located would be called the Sacred World in the future. After a moment of silence, all the saints gladly accepted the name Sacred Palace. It was simple but domineering. This was the name that the new sect needed. Now that the name had been decided, the next step was to announce to the world that the Sacred Palace had been established. At the same time, because of the initial establishment of the Sacred Palace, the entire Sacred Palace system had naturally undergone some adjustments. Although it was similar to the previous ancient Sacred Sect and Heavenly Sacred Sect, there were many differences in many aspects. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 953. With the establishment of the Sacred Palace imminent, Shao Chen, Qin Shuru, and the others had all arrived at the sacred region. Shao Chen had been staying in Ridge Mountain City for half a year. Now that the sacred region had been established, as the future first holy son of the Sacred Palace, Shao Chen naturally had to participate in the Sacred Palace's founding ceremony. Of course, Shao Chen was accompanied by Shao Qing, by Ryue, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, Fei Mei, and the others. It was their first time stepping into the sacred region. With just a glance, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the others were completely captivated by the magnificent scenery. Needless to say, the spiritual energy in the sacred region was at least 10 times more abundant than in the outside world. What truly shocked Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the others was the fairyland-like scenery in the sacred region. Clouds and mist drifted in and out of the shade of the trees. Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and the others couldn't help but exclaim, "What a beautiful place! Is this the small world where the new sect is located? It's so big. It can actually carve out such a huge small world," the girls exclaimed. In fact, they weren't the only ones. Even Shao Chen was a little shocked by the sacred region in front of them. It wasn't hard to imagine that Shao Xing, the 4 patriarchs, and the saints had probably put in a lot of effort to build the sacred region. Putting everything else aside, just creating the small world where the sacred region was located wasn't a simple task. Anyway, according to Shao Chen's understanding, a saint definitely couldn't do it. Only a quasi-saint had the ability to do so. It was an immortal-like existence, and this was where Shao Chen and the others would live and cultivate in the future. Accompanying Shao Qing and Bai Ryue, the group soon arrived at the sacred palace and the mountain peaks floating in the sky. He did not allow Shao Qing and Bai Ryue to stay in Lingshan Prefecture City. Instead, he chose to bring them to the sacred palace. Firstly, the cultivation environment in the sacred palace was clearly 100 times better than that of the Shao residence. Even if the 2 elders did not do anything here, they would at least be able to extend their lives. After all, there was such rich spiritual energy here. Secondly, the 2 elders were worried about Shao Chen. Although Shao Chen had completely grown up, Shao Chen was still a child in their eyes. Moreover, the 2 elders did not want to be separated from their son, so they followed Shao Chen to the sacred palace. Naturally, no one said anything about the arrival of the 2 elders. With Shao Chen's status, it was normal for him to bring his parents to live in the sacred palace. Just like the saints, they would also bring their families to live in the sacred region. Because the sacred palace was still in its initial stages, there were many things that had yet to be sorted out. However, Shao Chen's cave dwelling had already been completed, so he could bring everyone to move in. After settling down in the sacred palace, Qin Yao, Qin Luo, and Qin Shuru began to decorate the cave dwelling as soon as they entered. This was where everyone would live in the future, so there were many things that needed to be personally arranged by everyone. Shao Chen had no interest in this, so he strolled around the cave dwelling with nothing to do. Around dusk, Chun Ling and Long Qin came to visit. The 2 of them had also just arrived in the sacred region. The 3 of them naturally had to have a drink together. Moreover, according to what Shao Chen knew, Chun Ling and Long Qing would become chosen of the sacred palace in the future. This was something that Xiao Xing and the other ancestors had already thought about. With Chun Ling and Long Qing's strength, it would not be very difficult for them to become chosen. Not to mention, the two of them had broken through to the Dao Emperor realm just like Xiao Chun, so Xiao Chun was a little surprised. One of them was the reincarnation of a great expert, while the other was a pure-blooded dragon. Their cultivation speed was truly shocking. However, compared to the two of them, Xiao Chun was probably even more shocking. After all, Xiao Chun was just an ordinary human. He did not have any memories of his past life, nor was he a pure-blooded dragon. However, after so many years, Xiao Chen's cultivation had not been pulled apart by Chun Ling and Long Qing, and he was still closely behind them. The three siblings reunited and drank until late at night. In the end, Chun Ling and Long Qing directly stayed in Xiao Chen's cave dwelling. Following the completion of the sacred region, more and more people surged into the sacred region in the following month. These people were basically the disciples and attendants of the three sacred sects of the Tianhe continent. Of course, some of the disciples of the seven overlords of the Tianqian continent were also able to live in the sacred region. They could be considered as the first batch of disciples of the sacred palace. Because the sacred palace already had a strong foundation, the number of people in the sacred palace had already reached a terrifying 200,000 when it had just been completed. 200,000 disciples were only left after the saints had carefully selected and eliminated many people who did not have enough talent. If they had not been selected, the number of people would have probably exceeded 1 million. It was also because of this strict selection that those who were fortunate enough to become the first batch of official disciples of the sacred palace were not weak. They were even much stronger than the ancient sacred sects of the past. These 200,000 people were the first batch of official disciples of the sacred palace. As for the 800,000 people who were eliminated, after another round of selection, 400,000 people stayed and became unofficial disciples of the sacred palace. As for the remaining 400,000, those who did not pass the 2 rounds of selection could only choose to join the outer palace of the sacred palace, which was the small sects and clans of the Tianhe continent and the Tianqian continent. But now, with the establishment of the sacred palace, these clans and sects had been collectively referred to as the outer palace of the sacred palace. Throughout the Tianqian continent and the Tianhe continent, after continuous adjustments and optimizations, the sacred palace had a total of 99 outer palaces. The number could be said to be quite large. Moreover, the number of disciples in the outer palace had reached millions. It was simply embarrassing. However, although there were many outer palace disciples, their treatment was obviously not as good as the official disciples of the sacred palace. Even the unofficial disciples were far inferior. The reason was very simple. The outer palace disciples were not qualified to enter the sacred region at all. While sorting out the first batch of disciples of the sacred palace, the saints were also planning the establishment of the sacred palace at the same time. 3 months later, on this day, the sacred palace was officially established. Everyone in the Tianqian continent and the Tianhe continent congratulated it together. A colossal existence had truly appeared in front of everyone. The world saw the day of the sacred palace's establishment. That scene was probably unforgettable for the rest of their lives. There were 4 quasi-saints, a total of 46 saints, and a total of 10 saint sons and saintesses. Below them, there were even more quasi-saints, quasi-saintesses, and half-saints. There were so many that people couldn't even remember them. With such strength, the sacred palace was worthy of being the overlord of the 2 continents. All the warriors and forces on the Tianqian continent and the Tianhe continent bowed their heads. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. This chapter ends. Chapter 954. It was no exaggeration to say that the establishment of the sacred palace represented the arrival of a new era. All the forces of the Tianshan continent and the Tianhe continent were vassals of the sacred palace and had become its external palaces. For the first time, the sect masters of the various external palaces were fortunate enough to enter the sacred region. Guests and experts gathered on the central peak. The huge main peak was bustling with wine, music, and dancing. Shao Xing's 4 sacred palace ancestors, the 9 heavens saint and other sacred palace saints, as well as Shao Chun and other sacred palace chosen and saintesses were all present. Everyone drank and chatted, their hearts filled with hope for the future of the sacred palace. In truth, Shao Chun was already very familiar with such banquets and celebrations. However, the scale of the sacred palace's founding ceremony this time was much larger than any of the banquets and celebrations that Shao Chun had attended before. Almost all the famous people on the Tianhe continent and the Tianshan continent were present. Even Chu Wuming had rushed over from the Tianhe continent to participate in the sacred palace's founding ceremony. When the banquet was halfway through, ancient sage Randang, who was sitting on the main seat, suddenly said with a chuckle, "You're right." Everyone, in addition to announcing the establishment of the sacred palace, today's sacred palace ceremony also has an important announcement to make. As soon as Randang Koziai spoke, the crowd quickly quieted down. Although Randang Koziai's voice was very calm and gave off a refreshing feeling, no one dared to be presumptuous in front of him. This was because everyone present knew that Randang Koziai and the other 3 were genuine quasi-saints and could be said to be legendary figures. Now that Randang Koziai said that there was something else to announce, the crowd quieted down. Under the attention of the crowd, Randang Koziai did not keep them in suspense and slowly spoke. As everyone knows, there are a total of 10 sacred palace chosen and saintesses. Today, taking advantage of the sacred palace ceremony, the sacred palace will hold the first sacred palace chosen battle to determine the ranking of the 10 sacred palace chosen and saintesses. The chosen battle of the sacred palace. Upon hearing Randang Koziai's words, everyone present could no longer remain calm and couldn't help but grow excited. To be able to witness a battle between the chosen of the sacred palace was definitely a dream come true for everyone. One must know that the 10 chosen of the sacred palace had emerged from bloody battles with the demon race. They were genuine young kings who had crawled out from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. The holy sons and holy daughters of the heavenly saints sect, the ancient saints sect, and the Yangsheng sect had all died because of the 8 years of fierce battle with the Devil Clan. Now only 7 of them were left. Together with the 3 siblings, Shao Chun, Chun Ling, and Long Qing, they formed the 10 holy sons and holy daughters of the Divine Palace. No one present could remain calm after witnessing the battle between the 10 chosens and chosens of the sacred palace with their own eyes. Seeing that everyone's emotions had been completely stirred up, Randang Koziai smiled faintly and raised his hand to signal for everyone to calm down. He then said, "Everyone, please calm down for a moment. Before the chosen battle begins, this old man still has something to say. The chosen battle will determine the ranking of the 10 chosens of the sacred palace. However, before it begins, the 4 of us have decided together that the first chosen of the sacred palace will not be determined through a competition. Instead, the position will be directly held by Shao Chun. The chosen battle of the sacred palace was indeed going to be held, but the position of the first chosen had already been reserved. That person was Shao Chun." Following Randang Koziai's words, countless eyes instantly focused on Shao Chun. It was no exaggeration to say that if he became the first chosen of the sacred palace, Shao Chun could be described as having monstrous power in the future. His status would most likely surpass those of the saint. In the face of everyone's gazes, Shao Chun appeared very calm. After all, he already knew about this matter, so at this moment, there was nothing to be shocked about. However, compared to Shao Chun's calmness, the other chosens and saintesses all had different expressions. Chen Yu, Emperor Qing, Hu Fei, and Jiang Yu did not have any special thoughts other than being a little surprised. However, the remaining 3 chosens and saintesses from the Sky Saints sect and Sun Saints sect appeared very jealous. The 3 of them were naturally dissatisfied that Shao Chun had become the first son of the sacred palace without going through the competition. In their opinion, Shao Chen's strength was not enough to become the first son of the sacred palace. Sure enough, a woman with an icy temperament soon stood up and looked directly at Randang Kozai and the others on the main seat. Ancestor, since the ranking of the sacred palace chosens is determined through a competition, why is the position of the first chosen directly decided? This disciple is not convinced. This woman was called Yun Chuan, and she came from the Sun Saint sect. She was once the second saintess of the Sun Saint sect. Randang Kozai and the others had clearly expected this when they heard Yun Chuan's words. They did not answer and only looked at Shao Chun. Their meaning was very clear: they should solve their own problems by themselves. Shao Chen's position as the first chosen would definitely arouse the displeasure of the other chosens and saintesses. It was precisely because of this that Shao Xing and the others helped Shao Chen cleanse his marrow and break through to the Tao Emperor realm. At this moment, Shao Chen stood up helplessly when he saw the gazes of Shao Xing and the others. He smiled at Yun Chuan and said, "Senior sister Yun Chuan, why don't we spar?" If he wanted everyone to acknowledge his position as the first chosen, the simplest way was to rely on strength. So, Shao Chun did not waste his breath and directly challenged Yun Chuan. "If you're not convinced, then let's fight." Sure enough, Yun Chuan did not even give it a second thought when she heard Shao Chen's word. "All right, if I lose, I'll acknowledge your position as the first chosen. However, junior brother Shao Chen, if you lose, it means that you don't have the qualifications to become the first chosen of the sacred palace. You don't have any objections to this, right?" Of course. Shao Chen nodded when he heard Yun Chuan's words. The 2 of them agreed to battle. Afterwards, Shao Chen and Yun Chuan arrived at the spacious field at the center of the banquet and stood still. The sacred palace had already made preparations for this chosen battle, so they had specially set aside an empty space at the center of the banquet. Moreover, they had even specially inscribed a formation to isolate the aftershocks of the chosen battle. They stood still at the center of the field that had been prepared beforehand. At the same time, the formation activated, and an invisible screen of light quickly enveloped Shao Chen and Yun Chuan. The entire process of the battle could be clearly seen from the outside world. However, the aftershocks of the battle were unable to penetrate the formation at all, so they would not disturb the banquet. No one had expected that a chosen would battle so soon. Everyone present held their breaths in concentration as they looked at the 2 who stood 5 meters apart from each other. They were filled with excitement as they anticipated the start of the battle. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. This chapter ends. Chapter 955. The first chosen battle had begun so soon, and it was being fought by Shao Chen, who had already been selected as the first chosen, so it could be said that countless people were paying attention to this battle. After all, as the first chosen, Shao Chen was the leader of the 10 great chosen of the sacred palace, and his strength represented the top combat strength of the sacred palace's younger generation. To a large extent, one could infer the overall strength of the sacred palace's younger generation just by looking at Shao Chen's combat strength. After all, if even the so-called first chosen's combat strength was mediocre, then the strength of the chosen and even ordinary disciples below him was obvious. If a sheep led a pack of wolves, the wolves would become docile in the end, and if a wolf led a pack of sheep, the sheep would become ferocious in the end. This principle was very simple, and many people understood it. Therefore, everyone present was very much looking forward to the level of combat strength Shao Chen would display. Both of them were at the Tao Emperor realm, and a Tao Emperor was an emperor in the martial Tao. It was the final step in the martial Tao, and the next step was the half-saint realm. At the half-saint realm, they didn't pursue the martial Tao any longer, and they pursued the even more ethereal Saint Tao. Therefore, the Tao Emperor realm was said to be the end of the martial Tao. Now, the two young Tao Emperor realm experts, Shao Qin and Yun Chuan, were about to engage in a shocking battle under the gazes of countless people. Shao Qin looked at Yun Chuan calmly. He knew very well that he had to win this battle beautifully. At the very least, he had to intimidate everyone present. It wasn't just for himself, it was also for the sacred palace. He had to let everyone present know that the first chosen of the sacred palace wasn't just for show. Senior sister Yun Chuan, come. Shao Qin lightly exhaled and looked at Yun Chuan as he spoke indifferently. Yun Chuan didn't say anything else when she heard this, and a terrifying aura soared into the sky from her body. Just the eruption of this aura alone was enough to make the expressions of most people present change. One had to know that the people present were all sect leaders of various major forces. They had been famous for many years and could be considered as experts of the older generation. However, after sensing the aura coming from Yun Chuan's body, these old fellows had no choice but to admit that Yun Chuan's strength had already surpassed many of them. Even though Yun Chuan was only at the initial stage of the Tao Emperor realm, it wasn't exaggerated to say that in terms of combat strength, Yun Chuan was absolutely invincible in the Tao Emperor realm unless he encountered a saint or saintess of the same realm. He was already invincible in the Tao Emperor realm at such a young age, and it was even to the extent that he was barely able to fight a half-saint. Moreover, it was practically impossible for a half-saint to kill Yun Chuan. With such strength, how could the expressions of everyone present not change? However, compared to these old fellows, Shao Qin, who was facing Yun Chuan, appeared to be very calm at this time. There was not the slightest bit of panic in his eyes. Yun Chuan was the first to attack. His figure flashed, and he transformed into 3 afterimages that attacked Shao Qin from 3 different directions. This was the movement technique that Yun Chuan cultivated, and it was a top-grade heaven-rank movement technique. Once it was executed, it could transform into 3 afterimages. Of course, only the main body possessed offensive strength, and the other 2 afterimages were merely used to confuse the opponent. When facing Yun Chuan's attack, Shao Qin directly executed the stampede of tiger as well. A tiger's roar resounded, and then a lifelike image of a ferocious tiger slowly floated up into appearance behind Shao Qin. The stampede of tiger was a high-grade heaven-rank martial technique as well, and it wasn't inferior to Yun Chuan's movement technique. However, the emphasis they placed on it was different. He wasn't confused by Yun Chuan's afterimages, and Yun Chuan obviously didn't expect to defeat Shao Qin with just these 2 afterimages. Shao Qin's strength was obvious to all the saints and saintesses. Moreover, in terms of talent, Shao Qin was known as the strongest person. Therefore, it was obviously unrealistic to think that he could confuse Shao Qin with just these simple afterimages. The 2 of them were extremely fast, and they fought fiercely in the formation. Like Shao Qin, Yun Chuan's weapon was also a long sword. The 2 swords constantly clashed, and terrifying aftershocks were rampant in the formation. Fortunately, the formation was isolated. Otherwise, the aftershocks of the 2's battle would definitely affect the people around them. The battle was very intense, but people with discerning eyes could still see that Shao Qin had been defending all this time, and he didn't take the initiative to attack. Compared to Shao Qin, Yun Chuan's attacks were very sharp. However, no matter how Yun Chuan's attacks surged like a tide, Shao Qin's defense was still impenetrable. In fact, Yun Chuan's strength should be at the bottom of the sacred palace's 10 great saints and saintesses. Moreover, their cultivations were similar, so Shao Qin still had a great chance of winning against Yun Chuan. After fighting fiercely for a quarter of an hour, Shao Qin finally switched from defense to offense. The ink dragon Jian Yi in his hand changed its previous defensive stance, and took the initiative to stab at Yun Chuan. After switching from defense to offense, Shao Qin gradually gained the upper hand. At the same time, the tempered battle body, the laws of strength, and the laws of speed were all displayed. Xiao Chun quickly gained the upper hand. Under the enhancement of the precepts of force and speed, every strike was not only extremely fast, but also extremely powerful. Therefore, after exchanging a few blows with Xiao Chun, Yun Chuan felt that his right hand, which was holding the sword, could not help but tremble slightly. The tremendous power made Yun Chuan not dare to meet Xiao Chun head-on. In this regard, Xiao Chun obviously wouldn't give Yun Chuan such an opportunity. He firmly entangled Yun Chuan, and after a few hundred exchanges, Yun Chuan was already at a disadvantage. Yun Chuan didn't dare to meet the sword strike head-on, and could only dodge to the side. Seizing this opportunity, Xiao Chun directly pointed out with his finger, instantly displaying the shadow-bearing sword finger. The shadow-bearing finger sword was the most powerful attack that Xiao Chun had mastered at the moment. Furthermore, after years of training, it had reached the transcendent plane. With a single point, sword light flashed, and attacked Yun Chuan like lightning. In the face of Xiao Chun's attack, Yun Chuan's expression changed. He didn't dare to be careless, and immediately wanted to raise his sword to block. Unfortunately, the power of the shadow-bearing sword finger was too great. The two of them flipped the table, and the long sword in Yun Chuan's hand flew out. Without the long sword in his hand, on the other side, before Yun Chuan could react, Xiao Chun had already arrived. The tip of his sword gently pressed against Yun Chuan's throat, leaving only an inch of distance. With the long sword pressed against Yun Chuan's throat, Xiao Chun said indifferently, "Senior sister Yun Chuan, you've lost." After an hour of fierce battle, Xiao Chun finally won. Looking at the scene before them, the surrounding people were stunned. It wasn't that they were surprised by Xiao Chun's victory, but that the battle between the two of them was really too exciting. A battle of this level wasn't inferior to a fierce battle between two half-saints. Please add it to your collection, monthly vote, recommend it. End of chapter. Chapter 956. The battle between Xiao Chun and Yun Chuan ended with Xiao Chun's victory. This outcome was actually not unexpected for Xiao Xing and the other four ancestors. After all, Yun Chuan did not have much of a chance of winning against Xiao Chun at the same cultivation level. However, Yun Chuan's combat strength was indeed extraordinary. At the very least, she was able to block Xiao Chun's strongest attack, the shadow-bearing sword finger. If it was any other Dao Emperor stage expert, even if Xiao Chun's shadow-bearing sword finger could not directly kill them, it would definitely be enough to heavily injure them. However, Yun Chuan had successfully blocked it and even sent the sword in her hand flying. In fact, she could be said to be completely unharmed. The gap in strength between the 10 great chosen of the sacred palace was not too great. At the very least, it was not easy for Xiao Chun to defeat Yun Chuan. Moreover, this was merely an ordinary spar. If it was a battle of life and death, even if Xiao Chun could defeat Yun Chuan, it would probably be even more troublesome to kill her. It was even possible that Yun Chuan would escape. After the battle with Yun Chuan, Xiao Chun secretly estimated that if he wanted to kill Yun Chuan, he would only have a 70% chance of success. Moreover, he would have to go all out. As soon as Xiao Chun finished speaking, Yun Chuan was not a sore loser. She nodded and revealed a faint smile on her face as she said, "Junior brother Xiao is indeed someone who has changed after 3 days. I admit defeat." She very calmly admitted her defeat. Seeing this, Xiao Chun took the initiative to sheath his sword and said with a smile, "Senior sister Yun Chuan, thank you for letting me win." The result had already been decided. Following this, no one continued to insist on Xiao Chun's position as the first chosen saint. Of course, people like Chen Yu, Chun Ling, and Long Qing naturally wouldn't challenge Xiao Chun. As for the remaining people, after witnessing the battle between Xiao Chun and Yun Chuan, they also let go of the dissatisfaction in their hearts and acknowledged Xiao Chun's strength. After all, Xiao Chun had been reputed to have the strongest natural talent amongst all the holy sons and holy virgins on the Heavenly River continent. At that time, Xiao Chun's only shortcoming was his cultivation. After all, Shao Chen was young, and there was still a gap between his cultivation and theirs. But now, Shao Chen had broken through to the Tao Emperor realm, and the gap between their cultivations had been closed. Once the gap between their cultivations wasn't too great, there was naturally no need to doubt Shao Chen's strength. With the joint recommendation of the four ancestors and Shao Chen's various performances on the Heavenly River continent, the position of the first chosen saint was taken by Shao Chen without much resistance. The first chosen saint of the sacred palace had been confirmed, and it was Shao Chen. Next, the chosen saint ranking battle would officially begin. In fact, the rules of the chosen saint ranking battle were simple. First, the second chosen saint would be determined. Anyone who felt that they could become the second chosen saint could enter the arena and accept the challenges of the other holy sons and holy virgins. The person who remained on the arena in the end would become the second chosen saint. The rules of the chosen saint ranking battle were very simple and crude. As the ranking battle officially began, Chunling, who was sitting beside Shao Chen, was the first to stand up and say, "I'll go first." As he spoke, Chunling slowly walked into the array and waited for the other holy sons and holy virgins to challenge him. Chunling was the first to stand up and compete for the position of the second chosen saint. Soon, a handsome young man stood up. This person was called Bai Yi, and he was once the first chosen saint of the Sky Saint sect. Him entering the arena now meant that he also wanted the position of the second chosen saint. The first battle of the chosen saint ranking battle was between Chunling and Bai Yi. The holy sons were no strangers to Bai Yi. After all, he was already the first chosen of the Sky Saint sect. On the other hand, to be honest, the holy sons did not know much about Chunling. In the array, Chunling and Bai Yi stood facing each other. Bai Yi slowly opened his mouth and said, "Brother Chunling, actually, I've always been very interested in you." "That would be my honor." Hearing this, Chunling lightly smiled as he replied, "I've seen you fight with the demon race's demon son, so I know that you're very strong. I've wanted to fight with you for a long time. It seems that today is the best opportunity," Bai Yi said indifferently. In the war with the demon race, Bai Yi had seen the battle between Chunling and the demon race's demon son. Since then, Bai Yi had always been very interested in Chunling. As he spoke, a terrifying aura erupted from Bai Yi's body. This aura was slightly stronger than Yun Chuan's from before. Clearly, Bai Yi was stronger than Yun Chuan. Bai Yi took the lead. Following Bai Yi's attack, the Sacred Palace's chosen saint ranking battle officially began. Bai Yi and Chunling immediately clashed. Looking at the two people fighting fiercely in the array, Shao Chen could remember that this was the first time Chunling had displayed his strength in front of so many people. Although Shao Chen had always known that Chunling was very strong, in the eyes of outsiders, Chunling was a very mysterious person who rarely fought in front of everyone. It was also because of this that the crowd began to discuss Chunling when they saw that Bai Yi and Chunling were locked in battle. After all, Bai Yi was once the first chosen of the Sky Saint sect, and now, Chunling was actually able to fight him to a standstill. The battle lasted for a full 8 hours before a victor was finally decided. Chunling's skills were better and he won. After the end of the first battle, Chunling was given 4 hours to rest. After 4 hours, the other holy sons could continue their challenges. However, what no one expected was that after Chunling defeated Bai Yi, no one continued to challenge him. Chen Yu had no intention of challenging him at all. In the end, Chunling successfully took the position of the second chosen. The chosen saint ranking battle lasted for a full 4 days. For the people present, 4 days without sleep was no longer a problem for them at their cultivation level. Therefore, everyone present watched the chosen's ranking battle with great interest. Even after the last battle of the chosen's ranking battle ended, they still hadn't recovered from their shock. After 4 days of intense battles, the 10 chosen of the Sacred Palace were finally ranked. First chosen, Shao Chen. Second chosen, Chunling. Third chosen, Long Qing. Fourth chosen, Chen Yu. Fifth chosen, Emperor Qing. Sixth chosen, Bai Yi. Seventh chosen, Quan Lan. Eighth chosen, Hu Fei. Ninth chosen, Yun Chuan. 10th chosen, Jiang Yu. These were the final rankings of the 10 chosen of the Sacred Palace after 4 days of intense battles. It was no exaggeration to say that these 4 days were a visual feast for everyone present. Moreover, the Sacred Palace had also shown everyone a little of the Sacred Palace's strength through the chosen saint ranking battle. Any one of the 10 chosen could beat up cultivators of the same cultivation level. Moreover, even the weakest, the 10th chosen, Jiang Yu, had the strength to fight against a half-saint. Of course, for the saints and saintesses, combat strength was secondary. The most important thing was their potential, which was what made people fear them the most. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 957. In these 4 days, the 10 chosens of the Sacred Palace had shown everyone the strength of the Sacred Palace. Shao Xing and the other patriarchs were naturally happy to see this. They believed that after this ceremony, the Sacred Palace's position in the hearts of these people would become unshakable. In the future, as long as the Sacred Palace did not fall, all forces on the heavenly Chen continent and the Tianhe continent could only bow their heads to it. With the end of the Chosen's ranking battle, the rankings of the 10 Chosens were finally determined. Of course, there were still some surprises. First of all, Chen Yu was only ranked 4th in the Chosen's ranking battle, behind Shao Chen, Chen Ling, and Long Qing. Originally, everyone thought that with Chen Yu's strength, there should be no problem for him to be ranked 2nd. However, Chen Yu did not seem to be interested in the Chosen's ranking battle, so he did not choose to challenge Chen Ling and Long Qing at all. Even the position of 4th chosens could be said to be beyond Chen Yu's ability. Other than Chen Yu, there was also Bai Yi. In the Holy Sun ranking battle this time, Bai Yi was only ranked 6th. This was something that no one had expected. As the former first chosen of the Heavenly Saint sect, Bai Yi had actually lost to Emperor Qing in the competition for the 5th chosen position. Unknowingly, Emperor Qing's strength had surpassed Bai Yi, which was also a result that no one had expected. Of course, other than these 2 things that were more surprising, the rest could be considered as expected. However, it was undeniable that the 10 chosens of the Sacred Palace were indeed ridiculously strong. In fact, this was mostly due to the war with the demon race. It was precisely because of the 8 years of bloody war with the demon race that Shao Chun and the others could be said to have completed a complete transformation. Of the chosens of the Tianhe continent, only the 10 of them had survived. As such, they had climbed out from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, and their strength was naturally far greater than before. With the end of the Chosen's ranking battle, the Sacred Palace's founding ceremony was also announced. The various sect masters of the outer palaces also left one after another. As the sect masters of the outer palaces of the Sacred Palace, they did not have the qualifications to live in the holy region, so they naturally had to leave after the ceremony ended. With the departure of the sect masters of the outer palaces, the holy region quickly quieted down. The next step was to establish the Sacred Palace's system. According to the expectations of Shao Xing and the other 4 patriarchs, the Sacred Palace had the positions of patriarch, saint, elders, and deacons. At the same time, the disciples would be chosens, saintesses, prospective chosens, direct disciples, core, ordinary, and in-name disciples. Among them, there was no need to mention the patriarch. Shao Xing and the other 3 were the strongest in the Sacred Palace. At the same time, they were also the highest leaders in charge of everything in the Sacred Palace. Unlike the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect, the saints no longer held the position of elder in the Sacred Palace. Instead, they were saint venerables. Like the patriarchs, they did not participate in the daily management of the Sacred Palace and focused all their attention on cultivation. Unless something major happened, the saint venerables and patriarchs would not easily show their faces. This was the main task of the patriarchs and saint venerables. They were the pillars of the sacred palace and ensured that the sacred palace would prosper forever. On the other hand, the elders below them were half-saints, and the officers were Tao Emperor realm experts. At the same time, the sacred palace established the 10 sacred palaces, with the 10 chosens and saintesses as palace masters. All the rules in the 10 sacred palaces were set by the chosens and saintesses themselves. At the same time, the elders and half-saints of the sacred palace would belong to different sacred palaces and listen to the orders of their respective palace masters. Of course, in addition to the 10 sacred palaces, the sacred palace also established the mission hall, martial skills hall, and various cultivation secret realms. These were all managed by the saint venerables. Of course, the saint venerables would not show their faces. They just had to follow the rules. Apart from the above, the prospective chosens, prospective saintesses, direct disciples, core disciples, and ordinary disciples were not much different from the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect. The only thing worth mentioning was the nominal disciples. This was something the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect did not have. These nominal disciples were existences between the inner and outer palace disciples. Their talent was inferior to the inner palace disciples, but they were stronger than the outer palace disciples. Therefore, these nominal disciples could live and cultivate in the sacred region, but they were not qualified to enter the sacred mountains. The so-called sacred mountains were the dozens of mountains floating in the sky where the sacred palace was located. They were not qualified to enter the sacred mountains. Shao Xing and the other patriarchs had specially built a small city for them in the sacred region. These nominal disciples lived and cultivated in this small city until they became true inner palace disciples one day. At that time, they would be able to enter the sacred mountains. The entire system of the sacred palace was read out to everyone. Compared to the ancient sacred sect and heavenly sacred sect, the new system of the sacred palace was undoubtedly more distinct. The treatment that disciples of each level could receive was very different. The 10 chosens and saintesses had undoubtedly become the most powerful people in the sacred palace. This was because the patriarchs and sacred venerables were basically in charge. Therefore, in the entire sacred palace, the 10 chosens and saintesses had the final say. A handbook about the sacred palace had been issued to every disciple. The next day, Shao Xing and the other patriarchs also called Shao Chen and the other chosens and saintesses to the main hall of the central peak. Now that the chosens' ranking battle was over and the rankings of the chosens and saintesses had been confirmed, the next 10 halls were up to them to establish themselves. Once the 10 halls were established, the current sacred palace disciples would have to choose a different sacred palace to join. In the main hall, Shao Xing and the other 3 patriarchs sat on the main seats while Shao Chen and the other 5 patriarchs stood side by side. Shao Xing chuckled as he looked at the 10 of them. The establishment of the 10 sacred palaces will be up to you. Apart from the rules and regulations of the sacred palace, you can make your own decisions regarding the rules of the 10 sacred palaces. I believe that such a small matter will not be difficult for you. Shao Chen and the others were fully in charge of the 10 sacred palaces, including the rules and regulations of the 10 sacred palaces. This also meant that from now on, the rules and regulations of each sacred palace would be different. This was because the rules of each sacred palace would be decided by the chosens and saintesses of each sacred palace. Naturally, there would be differences. Shao Chen and the others nodded in agreement when they heard Shao Xing's words. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 958. Shao Chen and the others left the hall and headed to their respective main peak. The idea behind the construction of the sacred palace was very simple. The central peak was naturally where Shao Xing, the 4 ancestors, and the saints resided. At the same time, it was the most central location of the entire sacred palace, and it was the largest. 10 slightly smaller peaks floated around the central peak. These 4 peaks were the main peaks of the 10 sacred halls, and 90 smaller peaks floated around the main peaks of the 10 sacred halls. These 90 peaks belonged to different sacred halls. Every single main peak was surrounded by 9 similar peaks, and these peaks were where the disciples would live in the future. The central peak was where the ancestors and heavenly venerables resided, whereas the main peak was where the chosen, and elders resided. As for the personal disciples, core disciples, and ordinary disciples below them, they naturally resided on the 90 smaller peaks. They returned to the main peaks that belonged to them. None of the peaks had been named yet. Naturally, it was up to the chosen and saintesses to name them. After all, they would be the masters of the 10 sacred palaces in the future. Even the half-saint elders would have to obey the orders of the chosen and saintesses. Xiao Chen went straight back to his residence, which was located at the top of the main peak of the Sage Hall. He sat in the backyard with Qin Shuru and the others, and they discussed the matter of establishing the sacred halls. The 4 ancestors had only given them 3 days. They had to complete the construction of the sacred halls within 3 days, and then the disciples would be divided into different sacred halls. According to Shaoxing, every single sacred hall would have 20 half-saint elders, 50 Tao emperor attendants, 10 chosen and chosen saints, 200 personal disciples, and countless core and ordinary disciples. However, based on the current situation, every single sacred hall had to have at least 20,000 disciples. Actually, there wasn't much that needed to be done with the construction of the sacred halls. The construction had been completed a long time ago, and all that was left was for Xiao Chen and the other chosen to name their respective sacred halls and determine the rules and regulations. Only then would the 10 sacred halls be established. Xiao Chen was too lazy to think about the name of his temple. He directly decided to call it the Dustless Temple. The temple that belonged to Xiao Chen was named Wuchen Temple. As for the rules and regulations of Wuchen Temple, Xiao Chen directly threw them to Qin Shuru and the other 2 women. Anyway, Xiao Chen had no interest in these trivial matters. Xiao Chen didn't care about anything else other than naming the divine temple. On the next day, the 20 half-saint elders and 50 Tao emperor realm attendants that the 4 ancestors had sent to Wuchen Divine Hall arrived at Wuchen Divine Hall. These people would become Xiao Chen's right-hand men in the future, assisting Xiao Chen in managing everything in the Unsullied Temple. Xiao Chen wasn't too excited by their arrival. Even though the 20 half-saints and 50 Tao Emperor Realm experts would obey his orders from now on, Xiao Chen still wasn't too excited. Residences were arranged for everyone on Dustless Sacred Peak. The saints had expended a great deal of effort in the construction of the sacred palace this time. It wasn't just Xiao Chen and the other saints, even the prospective saints, half-saint elders, and Tao Emperor Realm attendants had their own residences. There were an entire few tens of residences on Wuchen Peak, and they stretched from the middle of the mountain all the way to the top. Of course, the residence at the top belonged to Xiao Chen. 3 days later, Xiao Chen and the other chosen had finished dealing with the matters of the 10 sacred halls. At the same time, the numerous disciples of the sacred palace had joined the various sacred halls. Every sacred hall had 20,000 disciples. When the disciples were choosing their sacred halls, the Wuchen Sacred Hall that belonged to Xiao Chen was clearly the most popular. As for the prodigies of the heavenly Chen continent like Guduwiao, Huangfu Ao, and the others, their first choice was naturally the Wuchen Sacred Hall. After so many years of tempering, Guduwiao and the others' improvement was far inferior to Xiao Chen. Not to mention Xiao Chen, even Qin Shuru and the other 2 girls were far inferior. However, Guduwiao and the others had all become chosen of the sacred palace, and their strength was much stronger than before. The disciples didn't hesitate to choose the sacred hall they liked. After they chose their sacred halls, their attire in the future would have the symbol of their respective sacred halls. For example, the disciples of Wuchen's sacred hall had a small golden sword embroidered on their chest, indicating that they were disciples of the sacred palace of Wuchen's sacred hall. After the 10 sacred halls were completed, the disciples successively joined them. Xiao Chen's Wuchen Sacred Hall, Chun Ling's Lingyun Sacred Hall, Long Qing's 10,000 Dragons Sacred Hall, Chun Yu's Ethereal Sacred Hall, Qing Emperor's Imperial Sacred Hall, Bai Yi's Heavenly White Sacred Hall, Quan Lan's Quan Lan Sacred Hall, Hu Fei's 100 Battles Shrines, Yun Chuan's Flowing Rain Sacred Hall, Jiang Yu's Mountain Sacred Hall. The 10 sacred halls became the sacred palace's autonomy. At the same time, with the completion of the 10 sacred halls, the sacred palace gradually became more precious. Xiao Xing and the other 3 ancestors also personally set off to the Tianhe continent to move the cultivation mystic realms of the ancient sacred sect, heavenly sacred sect, and sun sacred sect into the sacred region. Everything in the sacred palace was progressing in a good direction. However, no one knew that on a continent far away from the Tianshan continent, there was a continuous mountain range. In the depths of the mountain range, which should have been deserted, there was a cluster of buildings. This was the location of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. No one on the Tianshan continent had heard of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. However, on the way to the Tianshan continent, Xiao Chen and the others saved a sacred son of the Fallen River Sacred Sect named Wang Luo. Wang Luo was the only son of the sect master of the Fallen River Sacred Sect. Perhaps Xiao Chen and the others had forgotten about Wang Luo and the Fallen River Sacred Sect, but Wang Luo hadn't. To be precise, he hadn't forgotten about 100 Flower Fairy. After such a long time, Wang Luo had already sent people to inquire about 100 Flower Fairy. At this moment, in a beautiful cave residence, Wang Luo was sitting in the main hall. He looked at the 4 middle-aged men below him and asked in a low voice, "What? You still haven't found the beauty I'm looking for?" Hearing Wang Luo's words, one of them respectfully replied, "Young sect master, please calm down. We have tried our best to find her. We have searched all the continents in the starry sky, including the Blood Demon continent, the Tianhe continent, and the recently discovered Northern Demon continent. We have sent people to look for her, but we haven't found any clues." Wang Luo was very annoyed that they still hadn't found 100 Flower Fairies' whereabouts. Just as he was about to scold them, another middle-aged man spoke first. "Young sect master, we have sent people to the Tianhe continent and the other 2 continents. However, there is still one continent that we haven't searched." "Where is it?" "The Tianshan continent. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 959. There were only 4 continents in the starry sky where he met Flower Fairy. The Tianhe continent, the Northern Demon continent, the Blood Demon continent, and the Tianshan continent. Other than the Tianshan continent, the Falling River Saint sect had sent people to the other 3 continents with Flower Fairy's portrait, but there was still no news of her. It was hard to imagine that Flower Fairy, whom Wang Luo had only met once, would be so unforgettable. When he heard that there was still a Tianshan continent that had not been searched, Wang Luo stood up and said without hesitation, "Okay, such a beauty must be on the Tianshan continent. This time I will go personally." Although they had only met once, 100 Flower Fairy had already left an indelible impression in Wang Luo's heart. In Wang Luo's heart, he had to obtain 100 Flower Fairy no matter what. If he could obtain such a beauty, Wang Luo would not hesitate to use any means. Seeing that Wang Luo planned to go personally to the Tianshan continent, the 3 experts of the Falling River Saints sect were not surprised. During this period, ever since Wang Luo returned to the Falling River Saints sect, it was as if he had been bewitched. His heart was always with Flower Fairy, and from time to time, he would stare at Flower Fairy's portrait in a daze. His face was full of infatuation, as if his soul had been taken away. This portrait of Flower Fairy was based on Wang Luo's memory, and was made by the best artist in the Falling River Saints sect. It looked very lifelike, and through the portrait, the experts of the Falling River Saints sect knew that Flower Fairy was indeed indescribably beautiful. As the young sect leader of the Fallen River Saint sect, Wang Luo could be said to have gotten whatever he wanted since he was young. Of course, he was also considered to have lived up to expectations. His talent was not bad, so he became the holy son of the Fallen River Saint sect. However, due to his noble status, Wang Luo's personality was obviously somewhat arrogant and domineering. As long as he wanted something, there was nothing he could not get. Therefore, this time, he had his eyes on Flower Fairy. This was the first time Wang Luo had been so obsessed with a woman, so no matter what, Wang Luo must obtain Flower Fairy. 3 days later, Wang Luo left the Falling River Saint sect accompanied by the experts of the Falling River Saint sect. They boarded a starship and headed straight to the Tianshan continent. This time, Wang Luo brought along 2 saints of the Falling River Saint sect. He didn't take the Heavenly Chun continent seriously. After all, the Heavenly Chun continent was just a small continent. The Fallen River Holy Sect was a powerful saint-level family. There were no less than 15 Saint Realm experts in the sect. They were very powerful. However, Wang Luo did not expect that his trip to the Heavenly Chun continent would not only cost him his life, but also the Fallen River Saint sect that had been passed down for thousands of years. This was because the Tianshan continent now had the Sacred Palace, and the Sacred Palace was a quasi-saint clan. It was on a completely different level from the Falling River Saint sect. Wang Luo did not know this until now. He was very interested in the Tianshan continent. At the same time, in the sacred region of the Tianshan continent, the 10 Saints Temple had been completed. All the disciples had joined the 10 Saints Temple, and Xiao Chen and the other saints and saintesses had received holy sun robes personally made by Xiao Xing and the other patriarch. The golden robes were very wide, and the bottom reached the ankles. There was a huge saint word on the back. This was the holy sun robes that Xiao Xing and the other patriarchs had specially designed for the 10 saints and saintesses of the Sacred Palace. Not only was it a symbol of status, but it was also a very good defensive treasure that had reached the top of the saint level. The holy sun robes were personally made by the patriarchs, and the many disciples below had received brand new Sacred Palace disciple robes according to their different positions. Not only the disciples, but the elders, deacons, and saint venerables also received their own Sacred Palace robes. Under the operation of the 10 Saints Temple, the Sacred Palace was gradually on the right track, and the disciples slowly adapted to life in the Sacred Palace. At the same time, Xiao Xing and the other patriarchs had moved all the cultivation mystic realms of the ancient Saint sect, the Heavenly Saint sect, and the Sun Saint sect from the Tianhe continent into the sacred region. Now, in the sacred region, it could be said that all the cultivation holy lands of the Tianhe continent and the Tianshan continent had been gathered. The cultivation environment was simply incredible. With such a good cultivation environment and a large number of cultivation mystic realms, the disciples of the Sacred Palace believed that there would soon be a period of explosive growth, and everyone's strength would be able to make a qualitative leap. While continuing to develop the sacred region, Xiao Xing and the other patriarchs were also preparing to send people to the Blood Demon continent to completely exterminate the demonic cultivators, so that they would not have the slightest chance to counterattack. This time, the expedition to the Blood Demon continent was led by Prime Saint Ice Lotus, and at the same time, 10 saints accompanied her. Moreover, among the 10 saints' temples, Jiang Yu's Mountain Temple and Yunchuan's Rainwater Temple would be involved. The 2 holy temples' disciples were in charge of attacking the Blood Demon continent. This was the ancestors' decision. Without wasting any time, Prime Saint Ice Lotus led the disciples of the 2 holy temples and 10 holy sovereigns to leave the Heavenly Star continent and head towards the Blood Demon continent. Only the Mountain Temple and Rainwater Temple of the 10 Saints' temples had received the order to attack the Blood Demon continent. Regarding this, the saints and saintesses of the other 7 temples would inevitably have some small complaints. On this day, Xiao Chen was originally cultivating in his cave when the Qing Emperor, Chen Yu, and Hu Fei came looking for him. Sitting in a circle in the garden, Hu Fei, who was a battle maniac, said unhappily as soon as he arrived. "Damn it, if Jiang you can lead people to attack the Blood Demon Temple, why can't my Temple of 100 Battles go as well?" Hu Fei said angrily. Previously, he had personally gone to find the 4 patriarchs and wanted to lead people from the Temple of 100 Battles to the Blood Demon Continent. Unfortunately, he was rejected by the patriarch. After all, the Blood Demon Continent could be said to be basically crippled. Moreover, with Prime Saint Ice Lotus leading the team this time, the 2 temples were actually more than enough. Hu Fei's Temple of 100 Battles did not need to participate. Hu Fei was naturally unhappy that he did not get the opportunity to attack the Blood Demon Continent. Hearing this, Shao Chen could only smile helplessly. "Senior brother Hu Fei, good things have to be used on the edge of the blade. If the Sacred Palace still needs to go all out against the Blood Demon Continent, wouldn't it be a joke? Don't worry, this battle will be fought by you in the future." Shao Chen knew Hu Fei too well. As soon as Shao Chen finished speaking, a half-step Saint Elder of the Wuchen Temple hurriedly ran in. He did not even have time to salute Shao Chen. "Saint, an unidentified starship has arrived at the Tianqian continent. It seems like it wants to land on the Tianqian continent. The Saint Venerables have asked the Wuchen Temple to send people to take a look. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 960. A starship landed on the heavenly Chen continent. Upon hearing the elder's words, Shao Chen pondered for a moment before replying indifferently, "Then you can arrange for someone to go." He didn't care too much about this matter. After all, the heavenly Chen continent was no longer a continent that had no contact with the outside world. To be honest, the establishment of the Sacred Palace meant that they would have to deal with other continents in the future. Therefore, Shao Chen directly put the half-saint elder in charge of this matter. However, Shao Chen clearly didn't expect that this starship would come from the Fallen River Saint sect. Wang Luo was also on this starship. It had to be said that this guy had traveled thousands of miles to deliver his head on a silver platter. Upon hearing Shao Chen's words, the half-saint elder nodded in response and immediately arranged for someone to check the starship. The Sacred Palace didn't have any hostility towards this starship that had suddenly landed. If it were cultivators from other continents, the Sacred Palace wouldn't recommend playing host to them. Chen Yu and the other 2 didn't say much about Shao Chen's arrangements. After all, this was the Dustless Temple's matter, and they didn't have the authority to command Shao Chen. Shao Chen stopped thinking about this matter and continued to chat with Chen Yu and the other 2. Of course, the main topic was Hu Fei's complaint. The trip to the Blood Demon Continent this time had excluded him from the Temple of 100 Battles, which made Hu Fei very unhappy. While Shao Chen and the others were chatting, the starship from the Fallen River Saint sect directly landed on the heavenly Chen continent. At the same time, the half-saint elder that Shao Chen had met before also appeared above the starship with a few disciples of the Dustless Temple. As Wang Luo and the other experts of the Fallen River Saint sect arrived on the deck, the half-saint elder from the Dustless Temple slowly descended and cupped his hands towards Wang Luo and the others in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. "I am an elder of the Divine Palace's Dustless Temple. May I ask where you are from?" Since he didn't know the identity and purpose of Wang Luo and the others, the elder's tone was still calm. Hearing this, Wang Luo was obviously used to being arrogant and didn't return the greeting. He even snorted and said, "It's none of your business." Wang Luo completely ignored the elder. Hearing Wang Luo's words, the elder's face darkened. Fortunately, a young man beside Wang Luo smiled and said, "Holy Son, this person looks like a native of the heavenly Chen continent. Since we're here to look for someone, why don't you show him the portrait? Maybe he knows something." He guessed that this elder was a native of the heavenly Chen continent. Hearing this, Wang Luo immediately smiled and said, "That's right." After being reminded by the young man, Wang Luo quickly took out the portrait of 100-flower fairy from his storage ring, looked at the elder, and asked as if it was an order. "Let me ask you, have you seen the woman in this painting?" Wang Luo's attitude made the elder very unhappy. However, when he saw the woman in the painting, the elder was stunned. Wasn't this the wife of the Holy Sun Shao Qin, the Holy Sun 100-flower fairy? Why would Wang Luo have her portrait? The elder was a little stunned. Looking at his expression, Wang Luo was not a fool and quickly guessed that this elder must know 100-flower fairy. After searching for so long, he finally had some clues today. Wang Luo was overjoyed and immediately shouted to the two saints of the fallen river holy sect behind him. "Take him down." Since this elder knew 100-flower fairy, there was nothing more to say. Take him down and then slowly interrogate him. Wang Luo's style of doing things was very domineering. Of course, as the young sect master of the Fallen River Holy Sect, he was qualified to do so. Even the other holy sons and holy daughters of the Fallen River Holy Sect didn't dare to be too presumptuous in front of Wang Luo. There was no other way, who asked him to have a good background. However, Wang Luo clearly didn't expect that this was the heavenly Qin continent, where the sacred palace was located, and not his Fallen River Holy Sect. Therefore, when he heard Wang Luo's words, the half-step saint elder's face darkened. Without hesitation, he directly used a voice transmission talisman and sent the entire matter back to the dustless sacred hall. He had already seen that the two middle-aged men standing behind Wang Luo were Saint Realm experts, so the elder wasn't stupid enough to fight them head-on. Instead, he immediately sent the news back to the sacred palace. Shao Qin, who was in the dustless sacred hall, was chatting with Qing Yu and the other two when he suddenly received the elder's message. Noticing the change in Shao Qin's expression, Qin Yu and the other two asked, "What happened? What's wrong?" There was no need to hide it from the three of them, so Shao Qin directly told them about Wang Luo. Hearing this, Hu Fei was the first to stand up and shout, "Which force is this person from? How dare he be so arrogant? Junior brother Shao Qin, let's go and take a look." Hu Fei, who was already suppressing his anger, naturally couldn't hold it in when he heard that Wang Luo was so ignorant. Seeing this, Shao Qin didn't stop Hu Fei this time. The four of them planned to take a look together, but before they left, the four of them ran into Qin Shuru and the other two girls. When they heard that someone was causing trouble on the heavenly Qin continent, Gu Lingyao immediately expressed that she wanted to go with them. In the end, Shao Qin had no choice but to bring the three girls along. In the elder's voice transmission, he also told Shao Qin that there was a saint in Wang Luo's group. Therefore, when Shao Qin left the dustless sacred hall, he also ordered people to inform the saint sovereigns of this matter. They left the sacred region directly. As the distance wasn't far, Shao Qin and the others soon arrived above Wang Luo's spaceship. However, when they appeared, they immediately saw that the dustless sacred hall elder and a few other disciples had been forcefully captured by Wang Luo. At this time, on the deck of the starship, Wang Luo was sitting in his seat, while the elder's cultivation was sealed and he was being interrogated by Wang Luo. Looking at the miserable appearance of the elder, it was obvious that he had been beaten up. Seeing this, Shao Qin and the others' faces darkened. However, Qin Yu was the first to notice Wang Luo. Looking at Wang Luo, Qin Yu helplessly smiled bitterly. "Junior brother Shao Qin, I'm afraid he's here to make trouble for you." Shao Qin still didn't remember who Wang Luo was. Qin Yu pointed at Wang Luo and asked, "Senior brother Qin Yu, why do you say that? Junior brother, you really don't remember him?" With Qin Yu's reminder, Shao Qin finally remembered who Wang Luo was this time. At the same time, Wang Luo and the others also noticed Shao Qin and the others standing in the air. When they looked up, Wang Luo immediately saw 100-flower fairy standing beside Shao Qin. He immediately stood up and looked at 100-flower fairy in surprise. "Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 961. With Chen Yu's reminder, Xiao Chen finally remembered who Wang Luo was. He did not expect that Wang Luo, whom he had accidentally saved in space, would chase them all the way to Tianqian continent. Xiao Chen's eyes flashed coldly. From the way Wang Luo looked at Flower Fairy, how could Xiao Chen not know his intentions? It was obvious that he had chased Flower Fairy all the way here. Xiao Chen had guessed everything, and so did Chen Yu and the others. As for the three women, Qin Shuru's expression was cold and murderous. It was obvious that Wang Luo's actions had made Qin Shuru very unhappy. The three women were not only Xiao Chen's chess pieces, but they were also his brothers in love. Now that Wang Luo had the audacity to chase Flower Fairy all the way to Tianqian continent, how could Qin Shuru not be angry? Like Qin Shuru, Flower Fairy's expression was also cold. However, she also secretly observed Xiao Chen's expression. Seeing that Xiao Chen was fine, she was relieved. Just as Xiao Chen and the others guessed Wang Luo's intentions, Wang Luo led the people of the Fallen River Holy Sect into the air. They were protected by two saints of the Fallen River Holy Sect. Flying in front of Xiao Chen and the others, Wang Luo ignored them all and only had eyes for Flower Fairy. She was still as beautiful as ever. No wonder Wang Luo dreamed of her. Wang Luo said to Flower Fairy with what he thought was a gentle smile on his face, "Beauty, you really made it difficult for me to find you." Indeed, in order to find Flower Fairy, Wang Luo had spent a lot of effort. However, seeing the goddess of his dreams again, Wang Luo felt that all his efforts were worth it. However, in response to Wang Luo's words, Flower Fairy coldly replied, "As the saying goes, there is a way to solve a disaster, but there is no escape from a disaster brought on by oneself." Originally, Wang Luo was just a passerby to Xiao Chen. But now that he had chased him all the way to the heavenly Chen continent, Xiao Chen had no reason to let him go. Although they could tell that there were two saints standing on either side of Wang Luo, it didn't matter. This was the heavenly Chen continent, the headquarters of the sacred palace. Even if a quasi-saint came here, Xiao Xing's group of 4 wouldn't be able to kill them, let alone 2 saints. Even if they couldn't kill them, they could only end up fleeing in panic. So, Xiao Chen didn't take Wang Luo and the other 2 saints seriously at all. As for the other disciples and elders of the Fallen River Saint sect, they were like ants to him. Seeing how infatuated Wang Luo was with the 100-Flower Fairy, Xiao Chen was too lazy to say anything more. He directly used a sound transmission talisman and told Xiao Xing what had happened here. Since Wang Luo dared to chase them all the way to the heavenly Chen continent, Xiao Chen dared to make him stay here forever, regardless of his identity. In this starry sky there might be many sacred sects, but there were definitely not many quasi-saint sections. Moreover, the sacred palace had 4 quasi-saints, so they had the confidence to not fear anyone. He directly told Xiao Xing what had happened through the sound transmission talisman. Wang Luo didn't stop Xiao Chen's actions. Perhaps in his opinion, Xiao Chen couldn't make any waves at all, or perhaps he thought that the Fallen River Saint sect was strong enough, at least in this small heavenly Chen continent. With only the 100-Flower Fairy in his eyes, Hu Fei, who was the most impulsive, couldn't help but shout angrily in the face of Wang Luo's overbearing attitude. "Boy, you're courting death." Hu Fei couldn't help but shout at Wang Luo for looking at the 100-Flower Fairy so unscrupulously in front of everyone. In response to Hu Fei's angry shout, Wang Luo looked at Xiao Chen and the others and found that they were all familiar faces that he had seen in the starry sky. Wang Luo said indifferently, "Since you've repelled the space bandits, I'll spare your lives. Scram, such a beauty is not someone you can profane." Wang Luo did not seem to care about Xiao Chen and the others at all. Seeing this, Hu Fei was even more furious. Even the Qing Emperor exuded a faint murderous aura. Only Chen Yu still looked relaxed. Obviously, he did not take Wang Luo's words to heart. Perhaps in Chen Yu's opinion, Wang Luo was already a dying man, so there was no point in arguing with him. He didn't take Xiao Chen and the others seriously at all. Obviously, Wang Luo hadn't heard of the sacred palace either. However, just as he finished speaking, a saint of the fallen river saint sect beside him whispered to him, "Young sect master, I'm afraid something's wrong." Except for Hu Fei, Xiao Chen and the others didn't show the slightest panic. They were still so calm in the face of two saints. What did this mean? It meant that Xiao Chen and the others didn't fear Wang Luo and the fallen river saint sect behind them at all. Of course, Xiao Chen and the others didn't know the details of the fallen river saint sect, but even so, a mere fallen river saint sect wasn't enough to make the sacred palace fear them. In front of a quasi-saint sect, there was no doubt that a sacred sect could only bow down to them. The older, the wiser. The fallen river saint sect saint had already sensed that something was wrong from Xiao Chen and the others, but Wang Luo didn't believe it at all. After such a long time, Wang Luo still couldn't forget the 100-flower fairy. Now that he could finally see the beauty again, Wang Luo couldn't care less about anything else. Therefore, after hearing the fallen river saint sect saint's words, Wang Luo said indifferently, "Is there anyone in the Tianshan continent that the fallen river saint sect is afraid of? I must take this woman away today." Say no more. No matter what, Wang Luo was going to take the 100-flower fairy away today. As for Xiao Chen and the others, if they dared to stop him, he would directly kill them. Wang Luo was used to being lawless since he was young and thought that he could look down on anyone with the fallen river saint sect's support. Little did he know that he had really kicked an iron plate this time. Hearing Wang Luo's words, the faces of the two fallen river saint sect saints beside him turned extremely ugly. For some reason, the two saints suddenly had a bad premonition. It was as if Wang Luo's actions would cause unbearable consequences for the fallen river saint sect. As expected, not long after Wang Luo's words, Saint Qing Ju and the other 8 Saint Palace Saint Venerables appeared in the sky. When they saw Saint Qing Ju and the other Saint Venerables appear, and all 8 of them were wearing the golden robes of the Saint Palace Saint Venerables, they didn't need to think to know that the 8 of them were from the same faction. When they thought of how Xiao Chen and the others were also wearing golden robes, the two fallen river saint sect saints' expressions changed drastically. 8 Saint Realm experts were enough to crush Wang Luo and the others, but Wang Luo still spoke recklessly. "What, do you want to stop me? Do you know who I am? Have you heard of the Fallen River Saint sect?" Wang Luo thought that the Fallen River Saint sect could suppress Xiao Chen and the others, but when he spoke, an indifferent voice sounded from the sky. "Oh, so what about the Fallen River Saint sect? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.